Reincarnated as Mark Grayson from Invincible, a comic fan discovers he possesses both Viltrumite and Kryptonian powers. As new threats rise, Mark must master his dual heritage while protecting Earth from enemies far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Well, hello there. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn as Invincible with Superman powers. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
The skies burned with an ominous red as the planet's core destabilized, shaking the ground violently. Buildings crumbled under the immense pressure, their crystalline spires falling like glass rain. Panic filled the air as citizens moved around like headless chickens, their faces twisted in fear and despair. In the heart of this chaos, Jor-El sprinted through the collapsing corridors of the Kryptonian Science Council building. The Codex, a glowing, crystal artifact containing the genetic essence of Krypton's people, was tightly clutched in his hands. His white ceremonial robes were singed, and his face bore the marks of a desperate man who carried the weight of an entire civilization. Jor-El. Lara's voice crackled over his communicator. "Have you secured the Codex?" "Yes," he panted, ducking as a chunk of ceiling crashed behind him. "But Zod's forces are closing in. There's no time to lose." Ahead of him, a detachment of Zod's elite soldiers emerged from the smoke, their weapons trained on him. "Surrender the Codex, Jor-El," one of them barked. "General Zod demands it." Jor-El's eyes narrowed. He tapped his wrist console, activating a defensive drone that unleashed a barrage of energy pulses, forcing the soldiers into cover. Using the distraction, without looking, he darted into a nearby laboratory, one of the Council's most secretive experimental chambers. The chamber was a chaotic mess of shattered equipment and glowing consoles. In the center stood a teleportation device, its angular frame buzzing with unstable energy. It was a prototype meant to explore the theoretical boundaries of space-time, a project deemed too dangerous for public use. Jor-El's attention snapped back as the lab doors exploded inward. Zod soldiers stormed in, blasting at anything that moved. Diving for cover, Jor-El gritted his teeth. There was no escape now. As shots were being fired over Jor-El's head, he began lamenting the fact that he most likely wouldn't be able to send the Codex off with his son, Kal-El, in hopes that he would one day restore Krypton's people on a planet that wasn't collapsing. Suddenly, a stray blast struck the teleportation device's control panel next to him, causing it to spark and overload. The machine began to hum ominously, its energy field growing wild and erratic. "Jor-El." Zod's voice boomed as the general himself stepped into the room. His imposing figure, clad in dark battle armor, radiated fury. "You cannot save Krypton. Hand over the Codex, and we can rebuild our way." Jor-El ignored him, frantically looking for a way to escape his current situation. Just as he contemplated jumping out the window and having his drone catch him, a beam from Zod's rifle struck the ceiling, causing debris to rain down. A massive chunk struck Jor-El's shoulder, sending him sprawling. The Codex slipped from his grasp, landing directly into the teleportation beam. "No!" Jor-El reached out helplessly as the device roared to life. The Codex dissolved into the beam, vanishing into a glowing vortex of light and energy. The machine overloaded further, sparking uncontrollably. Zod's rage was palpable. He grabbed Jor-El by the collar, lifting him effortlessly. "What have you done?" he snarled. "Where is the Codex?" Jor-El smiled weakly, blood trickling from his lips. "I don't know, but you'll never find it." Before Zod could react, an explosion rocked the lab. The teleportation device imploded, tearing a rift in space-time. The force threw everyone back, and the scene dissolved into chaos. The Codex drifted silently through the infinite void of the multiverse, glowing faintly as it spiraled between dimensions. Time and space warped around it, pulling it toward an unfamiliar universe. Warping through the void, the Codex began to resonate with something, a fading soul. A 17-year-old boy named Martian Byron hovered on the edge of death, his body frail and broken from a long, losing battle with a terminal illness. His life was only filled with the entertainment of manga, anime, and comic books as he lay in his hospital bed for more than 10 years. His thoughts were a swirl of regret, yearning for the life he never truly lived. As the Codex approached, it glowed brighter, sensing the boy's potential. In a cosmic dance of fate, the codex merged with his soul, reshaping his essence. Energy surged as the genetic template of Krypton fused with the remnants of his humanity. The mutated soul continued traveling through the void to enter a universe different from his own in many ways. A new destiny was forged, a soul reborn with the genetic legacy of an entire civilization. What is this? Where am I? The thought surged through my mind like a thunderclap, raw and panicked. I couldn't see clearly, everything was blurry and distorted, like looking through fogged glass. The world around me felt enormous, overwhelming, and foreign. My limbs wouldn't respond properly. They felt weak, small, and uncoordinated. Why can't I move? I tried to speak, but all that came out was a garbled coo. A wave of helplessness washed over me, more intense than anything I'd felt before. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some strange hallucination. Something was wrong. Suddenly, a face came into focus. It was warm and kind, framed by dark hair and soft features. She smiled at me, her voice soothing. "You're okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Mommy? The word pierced through my panic like an arrow. My mother died while I was young. No. This wasn't possible. I wasn't a baby. I wasn't supposed to be. The last thing I remembered was the hospital. The pain. The endless beeping of machines that were keeping me alive. The moment everything went dark. I had died. I was sure of it. So how was I here? The woman rocked me gently in her arms. My vision cleared slightly, just enough to make out another figure standing in the background. Tall, broad-shouldered, and imposing, with a thick mustache and an air of quiet authority. "Are babies usually this small and fragile, Debbie?" His voice was deep and steady and carried a faint edge of curiosity. "Yes, Nolan," the woman, Debbie, replied with a soft laugh. "Even you had to be small and fragile as a baby. You're not exactly exempt from biology." She turned her gaze back to me, her eyes filled with love. "Look at you, my little Mark. You're perfect." Mark. Debbie. Nolan. The names echoed in my mind, distant and faint but undeniably familiar. I clung to them, desperate for something to anchor myself. They meant something. Something important. Something that explained all of this. But the pieces wouldn't click. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, and every time I tried to focus, the warmth of Debbie's arms and the exhaustion in my tiny body pulled me back into the present. For now, I let the names drift into the background, choosing instead to observe the people in front of me. Debbie's voice was kind and soothing. She held me with a tenderness I hadn't felt in years. Her touch reminded me of my own mother, gentle but strong, protective. It was almost enough to calm the storm inside me. Almost. My eyes drifted to Nolan. He was terrifying. Not in a conventional sense, but in the way he stood, the way he watched me. His gaze wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. It was calculating, curious. Like he was waiting for something. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of any of it. My body, my surroundings, these people, they were all wrong. And yet, the warmth of Debbie's arms and the exhaustion in my small, fragile body made it impossible to fight the confusion for long. I let my eyes drift closed, the storm in my mind settling into a quiet hum of unanswered questions. The answers would come later. For now, I had no choice but to wait. 5 years had passed since I woke up in this strange new world, confused and helpless. In that time, I had settled into the life of Mark Grayson, the son of Nolan and Debbie. Despite the occasional pang of unease that came with the fragmented memories of my past life, I'd grown to love my new parents. Debbie was everything you'd want in a mother, caring, warm, and endlessly patient. Nolan, though stern and reserved, had his moments of genuine affection that made me feel safe. It wasn't a bad life so far. In fact, it was wonderful. I have a family, a home, and a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt in my past life. For a while, I let myself forget the nagging sense that something wasn't right. I was happy, or at least as happy as someone who occasionally remembered dying could be. "Mark," my father's voice called out to me. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his towering frame filling the space. He gave me a small smile. "Come with me. There's something we need to talk about." I followed him silently, wondering what he wanted to talk to me about. The room was warm and richly decorated, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk in the center. He motioned for me to sit on the small couch near the window. He sat across from me, leaning forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, like he was gauging my reaction before he even said anything. "Mark," he began, his tone steady but serious. "You're old enough now to understand the truth about who I am, and who you are." I looked at him confused, my 5-year-old brain wondering what he meant. "I'm not from Earth," he said. "I'm from a planet called Viltrum. It's far away, in another galaxy. Our people are strong and resilient. We're protectors, Mark. We've spent centuries traveling to other worlds, helping weaker civilizations thrive. That's what I came here to do." He paused, watching me closely. I kept my face neutral, though my heart was pounding. The pieces were clicking into place, faster and faster. The word Viltrum. The idea of traveling to other planets. His reserved, calculating demeanor. My stomach churned as my repressed memories pulled together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. "I fell in love with this planet," he continued, his tone softening. "With your mom. With you. And now, Earth is my home. It's our home. One day, you'll understand what it means to be a Viltrumite. You'll grow stronger, faster, and more capable than anyone else on this planet. It's in your blood, Mark. You're special." His words should have been comforting. They should have made me feel like I was part of something greater. But instead, they made my stomach churn. I couldn't stop thinking about what I remembered and knew was coming. This wasn't just a second chance at life. This was the life. The invincible universe. And my father was Omniman. The same Omniman whose mission was to weaken Earth for the Viltrumite Empire. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. The memories of my past life were clearer now, like a fog had lifted. I was in the invincible universe. I was Mark Grayson. And I was going to have Viltrumite powers. I couldn't stop smiling as I stared up at the ceiling. This wasn't just a second chance, it was the chance of a lifetime. Sure, I knew what was coming. I knew about Nolan's mission and the dark road that lay ahead. But right now, none of that mattered. All I could think about was flying, fighting, and finally getting to live the kind of life I'd always dreamed of. And if things went off the rails? Well, I had knowledge from my past life. I could change things. Make this story my own. For the first time in years, maybe even longer, I felt truly alive. The future wasn't just bright. It was invincible. Mark threw himself into training with an intensity that surprised even him. He couldn't exactly tell his father why he was so driven. Nolan would have been suspicious, but he used every opportunity to build himself up. His school gym became his sanctuary, and he signed up for martial arts classes under the guise of wanting to get ready for when his powers awaken. By the time he was 14, Mark had developed a solid foundation in multiple fighting styles. Boxing taught him precision and endurance, jiu-jitsu gave him control and grappling techniques, Muay Thai made his strikes devastating. With his Viltrumite powers not awakening yet, Mark relied on his wit and willpower, pushing his limits every single day. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Mark would practice in secret. He shadowboxed in his room, replaying techniques in his mind over and over again. He studied online footage of fighters and heroes alike, analyzing their moves, imagining how they'd fare against someone as strong as a Viltrumite. The years passed, and Mark's anticipation only grew. He waited for the day when he'd finally feel the strength of his Viltrumite blood coursing through his veins. Some days, he'd catch himself staring at his reflection, wondering what it would feel like to fly, to punch through solid steel, to be invincible. He knew he would have to wait until he was at least 17 due to being a late bloomer like in the comics, but he was still excited. While Mark diligently trained for the challenges he knew lay ahead, he also made a conscious effort to embrace the life experiences he had missed in his past life. He joined his middle school basketball team, made some friends, got his driver's license, and even took tentative steps into the world of dating, all to live a fuller, more balanced life. It happened a few months after his 17th birthday. Mark was taking out the trash at Burger Mart after a long shift. He had taken the job so he could know when his powers would come in, just like in the series. When Mark started lifting the trash to throw it in the dumpster, it suddenly flew off into the atmosphere. Yes. Mark exclaimed as he started dancing around. His powers really did come in just like in the series, and he was ecstatic. But just as the euphoria set in, a wave of physical and mental pain hit him. Mark could feel his muscles tightening, providing strength he wasn't expecting even with his Viltrumite heritage. His senses sharpened. He could hear the hum of a streetlight blocks away and smell the grease from the restaurant's fryer even through the night air. His mind exploded with images. Crystalline towers rising under a red sun. Symbols and words in a language he'd never learned but now understood perfectly. Memories of a world called Krypton, of its history, its people, and its final days. Mark stumbled backward, his head spinning from his heightened senses. The codex provided him with a memory of how it had fallen into the teleporter, fused with his fading soul in the void, and was the reason he was brought to the Invincible universe. The codex was inactive for 17 years, until Mark's Viltrumite genetics awoke, allowing the codex to assimilate Kryptonian DNA with his Viltrumite DNA. Remembering the Superman comics he had read during long hours in his hospital bed in his past life, Mark focused on gaining control over his newly awakened senses. Fortunately, his Kryptonian powers, while impressive, hadn't yet grown too overwhelming to manage. After an hour of concentrated effort to quiet the barrage of sounds flooding his ears, he succeeded in dialing back his hearing to the level of a slightly above-average human, giving him a small but meaningful victory. "Whoa, that was way harder than the movies and comics made it look," Mark muttered to himself. He walked back into Burger Mart, ripped off his apron, and marched up to his manager, shoving it into their hands. "I quit," he declared and walked out of the store. Mark wanted to get a handle on his powers before heading home, so he made his way to the nearest park. The codex and my Viltrumite genes seem to be helping me adapt to my powers quickly, he thought, a mix of excitement and determination bubbling within him. But let's put them to a real test. Scanning the park, he spotted a secluded area surrounded by trees, offering enough cover to avoid being seen. Once there, he took a deep breath, kneeling down to center himself before attempting his first real flight. The sensation was strange at first, like his body was learning to balance two distinct methods of flying. His Viltrumite side provided him with natural biological instincts, almost as if he'd always known how to propel himself through the air in any direction with sheer willpower. At the same time, his Kryptonian side activated a bioelectric field, allowing him to negate gravity's pull and move with effortless precision. The dual sensations felt alien yet harmonious, as if both sides of his heritage were working together. Mark couldn't help but grin as he pushed off the ground, ready to see just how far his newfound powers could take him. Mark soared higher, a laugh escaping his lips as the trees became dots below him. This is amazing," he shouted to no one, the wind whipping past his face. The sensation was exhilarating, a mix of freedom and power that was beyond anything he had ever imagined. After a few minutes of flying, Mark landed near a boulder at the edge of the park. His landing wasn't perfect, but it was controlled enough to avoid a crash. He stared at the massive rock in front of him, his fingers twitching as he thought about the strength now coursing through his body. "Let's see how far this goes," he thought, stepping forward. With one hand, he gripped the edge of the boulder and lifted. It came off the ground effortlessly, as if it weighed no more than a pillow. Mark grinned and threw the rock a few dozen feet away, watching it crash into a tree with a thunderous sound. Next came speed. Mark crouched low and sprinted across the clearing, the world blurring around him as he moved faster than his eyes could track. The rush of air against his face was exhilarating, and by the time he skidded to a stop, the clearing looked like it had been hit by a tornado, with grass and dirt kicked up in every direction. But not everything came as easily. Heat vision was a struggle to control. Mark squinted at a pile of rocks, willing the energy from his Kryptonian side to manifest. It took a few attempts, but eventually, twin beams of intense red heat shot from his eyes, reducing the rocks to molten slag. The burst of energy left him breathless, and for a moment, he felt the strain of using powers he hadn't fully mastered. "Okay, heat vision needs work," he thought, wiping sweat from his brow. The bioelectric field also required concentration. Mark experimented with hovering and gliding, carefully adjusting his movements with subtle shifts of his body. Drawing on memories of comics and shows like Young Justice and the comic book version of Superboy, he decided to test whether he could replicate tactile telekinesis. Stretching his hand toward a nearby rock, he focused, willing his bioelectric aura to extend and envelop the object. After a few tense seconds, he felt his aura shift, wrapping around the rock. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it into the air, watching as it soared out of sight. Awesome! He shouted, grinning as he realized what he had just accomplished. Encouraged, Mark turned to another experiment, recreating one of Superboy's iconic abilities, telekinetic barriers. He envisioned extending his bioelectric aura into a solid, tangible construct, forming a protective shield or wall. With his hands outstretched, he focused intently, imagining the field expanding outward and hardening into a barrier. The air around him shimmered faintly as the energy began to take shape. He thought, the possibilities swirling in his mind. I assumed the Codex would limit me to the standard abilities of a yellow sun-powered Kryptonian: super strength, speed, senses, heat vision, and X-ray vision. But this is something else. If I can replicate non-standard Kryptonian abilities, who knows what I could achieve? His mind raced with possibilities, a grin spreading across his face. With my knowledge of comics, I could potentially develop powers even Superman never had. I might even be able to project solar energy blasts, like Superman 1,000,000 foot. The thought filled him with excitement and determination. After realizing how late it was getting, Mark flew off and arrived in the backyard of his home, his legs wobbling slightly as he landed. His head was buzzing with adrenaline, his mind racing with the possibilities of what he could do. But as he stood there, staring at the house he'd grown up in, reality came crashing back. He had his powers now, powers that were incredible, world-shaking. But that didn't change the harsh reality. His father was Omni-Man. And Mark knew exactly what that meant for the future. Sliding open the backyard door, he stepped into the house, where his mother and father were sitting at the table, finishing dinner. Debbie looked up, surprised. "Oh, Mark. I didn't see you come in. What were you doing out in the backyard?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "My powers just kicked in." Debbie's eyes lit up with pride and excitement. "Oh, Mark, that's wonderful," she said. Nolan had a small smile on his face. "I knew it was only a matter of time," he said, his tone calm but carrying a hint of satisfaction. "How do you feel?" Mark hesitated, glancing at his father. "Strong. Fast. Like I can do anything." Later that night, as Mark lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had revealed his powers to his parents because he knew it was inevitable. Nolan would have found out sooner or later. But now, he had to make a choice. Mark clenched his fists. He knew the timeline. He knew the Guardians of the Globe would die, and he knew it would be his father's doing. But as much as it pained him, he wasn't ready to stop Nolan. Not yet. His training had prepared him for a lot, but he could feel the gap in power between them. "I need more time," he thought, his jaw tightening. "I need to get stronger." As the moonlight filtered through his window, Mark closed his eyes, already thinking about how to push his new powers even further. The sharp sound of knocking woke Mark at exactly 6 a.m. His groggy eyes blinked open to find his father standing in the doorway, already dressed in his Omni-Man uniform. "Up and at 'em, son," Nolan said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. "It's time to see what you've got." Mark groaned, sitting up in bed. "Now? It's so early." Nolan smirked. "Crime doesn't sleep, and neither should you if you want to be a hero. Come on." Mark sighed but quickly got dressed. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the first official training session with his dad. He knew he couldn't afford to mess it up, but he also couldn't let Nolan figure out just how much he'd already mastered on his own. If he was going to stick to the timeline, he needed to play the part of a beginner. They flew out to a remote field just as the sun began to rise, the golden light spilling over the horizon. Mark followed Nolan's lead, carefully keeping his flight a little wobbly, as if he were still getting used to it. Nolan glanced back at him, nodding in approval. "Not bad for your first flight," Nolan said as they landed. "But we've got a long way to go." Mark stretched, pretending to shake off some nerves. "Okay, what's first?" The rest of the morning was spent refining Mark's flight, strength, and precision. Nolan explained how to conserve energy during long flights. Mark made sure to stumble occasionally, trying to sell the image of a novice, but he couldn't hide his natural agility. When they moved on to combat training, things got more intense. Nolan demonstrated a series of punches and blocks, encouraging Mark to copy them. Mark hesitated but quickly fell into the rhythm, his years of martial arts training coming back to him. Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched Mark adapt. "You've done this before," Nolan said, throwing a light jab that Mark instinctively blocked. "Yeah, I took martial arts for a while when I was younger, remember?" Mark admitted, keeping his tone casual. "Good," Nolan said with a grin. "That'll help. But there's a big difference between sparring in a dojo and fighting someone like me." Mark swallowed hard as Nolan squared up. "Let's see how you handle yourself." They began sparring, Nolan holding back significantly while Mark tried to keep up. Each punch felt like a freight train, even when Nolan was pulling them. Mark managed to land a few glancing blows, but it was clear who had the upper hand. After a few minutes, Mark stepped back, panting. "Okay, I give. You're way stronger than me." Nolan chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Of course I am. I've been doing this for decades. But you're learning fast, faster than I thought you would. You've got potential, Mark. You'll be strong one day, really strong." Mark couldn't help but smile at the praise, even as his arms ached from the sparring. "Thanks, Dad." "Now, get ready for school," Nolan said, ruffling his hair. "We'll pick this up later." Mark had spent years piecing together how this universe worked, from what he remembered of the Invincible comics to what he'd observed firsthand. He couldn't risk disrupting things too soon. Certain events had to happen, like getting his superhero costume from Art Rosenbaum. And for that, he'd need his father's approval. After wolfing down a quick breakfast and saying goodbye to his parents, Mark slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked out the door. The world seemed brighter now that he had his powers. Everything looked sharper and clearer, as if his senses had been turned up to 11. He could feel the sun's rays energizing his cells, making him more alert, like he just had a shot of coffee. As Mark reached the school gates, he spotted William waiting for him near the lockers. William grinned when he saw him. "Hey, Mark. You're looking unusually chipper for someone who's about to spend 8 hours trapped in this glorified prison." Mark smirked. "What can I say? Just feeling good." Before William could press him further, a commotion down the hall caught their attention. Todd, the school bully, had cornered Amber Bennett near her locker, leaning in too close for comfort. Mark smirked. "Right on cue." "Come on, Amber," Todd sneered. "You don't have to play hard to get." "She doesn't have to play anything," Mark said, stepping in. "Back off, Todd." Todd turned, glaring at him. "What's your deal, Grayson? You got a death wish?" Mark met his gaze, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Not really. Just figured you'd want to save yourself the embarrassment of getting shut down in front of everyone." Amber smirked, and Todd's face turned red with anger. He clenched his fists, stepping closer, but the bell rang before he could say anything. With a grunt, Todd stormed off. "Thanks, Mark," Amber said, giving him a small smile. "You didn't have to do that." Mark shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, well, someone had to." After school, Mark made his way to the empty lot behind the building. Changing into a hoodie, scarf, and sunglasses to hide his identity, he prepared for his first outing as a superhero. He knew the timeline. His father would notice his superhero activities soon enough and take him to Art's shop for the suit. Until then, he had to keep things small. Just enough to stay on track. Taking a deep breath, Mark launched himself into the sky. The city stretched out beneath him, and he couldn't help but grin. "This is what I've been waiting for." As he soared over the rooftops, Mark used his enhanced hearing to scan for trouble. It didn't take long to find it. The sound of police sirens and shouting echoed through the streets below. Mark dove down, spotting a police chase unfolding. 2 masked robbers and Titan, whom he remembered from the comics, were speeding away in a stolen van, the back doors swinging open to reveal bags of cash spilling onto the road. Mark swooped down, landing on the roof of the van. The robbers inside panicked as the vehicle swerved wildly. "What the hell is that?" one of them shouted. "Just pull over." Mark yelled, punching through the roof and grabbing the driver's wheel. With a sharp yank, he forced the van into an alley, bringing it to a screeching halt. Titan and the others scrambled out, but Mark moved fast. He grabbed 2 of them by the collars and slammed them against the van, knocking them out. Titan tried to fight back, throwing a punch, but Mark blocked it effortlessly, sending Titan sprawling with a light shove. "You're done," Mark said as police cars screeched to a stop nearby. Before anyone could question him, he flew off. "You've been busy," Nolan said, appearing beside him mid-flight. Mark shrugged. "I couldn't just let them get away." "Good," Nolan said, a note of approval in his voice. "But if you're serious about this, you'll need a proper suit. Come on." They flew to Art Rosenbaum's shop, where Mark spent the next hour working on his suit's design. Remembering the solar battery discs from the first design Art showed him, Mark asked to incorporate them into a flexible armor inspired by Vegetas from Dragon Ball. The suit retained his iconic blue and yellow color scheme, with an added bold eye insignia on the chest. "Are you sure about the solar discs?" Nolan asked, raising an eyebrow. "They're practically useless for you." Mark grinned. "What if I'm in space and need to charge my phone?" he joked, though inwardly he knew the solar batteries could be a valuable asset for his Kryptonian abilities, especially under a red sun. "You wouldn't have a signal in space," Nolan deadpanned. "Oh, right," Mark said sheepishly. "What are you calling yourself?" Art asked. Mark smiled, looking at his reflection. "Invincible." "It's finally begun," Mark thought as he stood silently beside his mother. Debbie's soft sobs filled the room as she clung to Nolan's hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles as if her touch could somehow wake him. Her tear-streaked face was etched with worry, her red-rimmed eyes locked on her husband, who lay motionless in the hospital bed. Mark's gaze shifted to his father. Nolan looked peaceful, almost serene, as the machines around him beeped softly, monitoring his vitals. The oxygen mask covering his face rose and fell rhythmically, the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the room. To anyone else, this might look like a tragic scene, a hero gravely injured in battle. But Mark knew better. He wasn't injured, not really. This was all an act, part of the facade Nolan was carefully maintaining. Last night, while Mark had been asleep, the Guardians of the Globe had been summoned to their headquarters. One by one, they had arrived, only to find themselves face-to-face with Omni-Man. The battle had been swift and brutal. Blood spattered the walls as Nolan tore through the Guardians with ruthless efficiency. When the carnage ended, he stood alone among the bodies, his chest heaving. Then, as planned, he collapsed to the ground, feigning unconsciousness to cover his betrayal. Now, Mark stood in the aftermath, his chest tight as he watched his mother unravel. How could Nolan do this to her? How could he stand there and let her believe this lie? Mark's fists clenched at his sides, his emotions simmering just beneath the surface. He didn't know what to say, didn't know if there was anything to say. Debbie had been his mom for the past 17 years. In his previous life, his mother had passed away when he was young, leaving him without the chance to form a deep bond with her. But Debbie had always been his true mother in every way that mattered, and it pained him deeply to see her so distraught. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the heavy silence. Mark turned to see Cecil Stedman, the director of the Global Defense Agency, entering the room. His expression was unreadable, as always, but his presence carried an undeniable weight. He nodded briefly to Debbie, his tone soft as he said, "I'm sorry for what you're going through." Then his gaze shifted to Mark, his demeanor hardening. "Mark," Cecil said briskly, "can I have a word?" Mark quickly glanced at his mom. She barely seemed to notice him as her attention remained fixed on Nolan. With a crisp nod, Mark followed Cecil into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind them, Cecil pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. A live news feed flickered to life, showing chaos in the heart of the city. Mark looked at the tablet. Aliens clad in mechanical armor were pouring out of shimmering portals, firing energy weapons that tore through buildings and civilians alike. Screams echoed through the feed as people scattered in every direction, their movements frantic amidst the collapsing rubble. "They've never attacked before," Cecil began, his voice grim. "They're organized, they're relentless, and they're not stopping. We're doing everything we can, but we're stretched thin. And with the Guardians gone." He trailed off, his eyes meeting Mark's with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "You need my help," Mark said, his voice steady. Cecil nodded. "You're the strongest resource we have right now. I won't lie to you, this is bad. But I've seen what you can do, and I know you can handle this." Mark had to suppress a smirk. This was the moment he'd been preparing for, the moment he'd planned for. He couldn't afford to mess it up. The Flaxons were just the beginning, a stepping stone to what was coming. "All right," Mark said finally. "I'll handle it." He glanced at the screen one last time, his resolve hardening. "It's time to put my plans into motion." Mark soared through the sky, the wind whipping past him as he approached the battlefield. His invincible suit, crafted by art, clung tightly to his frame, the bold yellow and blue colors standing out against the smoke-filled skyline. Below him, chaos reigned. Flaxon soldiers swarmed the streets, their weapons leveling entire blocks in seconds. Civilians screamed as they ran for cover, dodging falling debris and energy blasts. He dove into the fray, landing hard in the middle of a group of Flaxons. The ground cracked beneath his feet as the shockwave from his landing sent several soldiers sprawling. Before they could react, Mark moved, his fists ablur as he tore through their ranks. Each punch connected with brutal precision, shattering armor and sending bodies flying. The first Flaxon he took down lay motionless on the ground, his armor cracked open. Mark paused, staring at the body. A lump formed in his throat. "I killed him." The realization hit hard. This wasn't like the comics or movies he'd grown up watching. This was real. The Flaxons weren't faceless enemies, they were living beings, and he was ending their lives. His moment of hesitation cost him. A blast of energy struck him from the side, throwing him into the rubble of a nearby building. Mark grunted, shaking off the hit, and looked up to see more Flaxons advancing, their weapons trained on him. The weight of their actions, the destruction, the lives they'd already taken, snapped him out of his daze. "They're not here to play fair," he thought, pushing himself to his feet. "This is the Invincible universe. It's kill or be killed." A new fire ignited in his chest, and his Viltrumite instincts surged to the forefront. The hesitation and guilt melted away, replaced by cold, calculated focus. Mark gritted his teeth. "I might not be a true hero like Superman, but I'm not letting these monsters destroy the city." He charged forward, his movements precise and unrelenting. He tore through the Flaxons like a force of nature, using their own weapons against them when necessary. The thrill of the fight coursed through him, a primal excitement that made his heart race. For the first time, he felt truly alive. The strength he'd always dreamed of having was finally his, and he wasn't going to waste it. Just as Mark was beginning to feel the thrill of battle course through him, he forced himself to stay focused. Protect the civilians first. Keep the Flaxons busy. "Hey, need a hand." Mark turned to see a flash of pink energy soaring through the air. A girl landed gracefully nearby, her glowing constructs pushing back a group of Flaxons. Her red hair framed her face, and her emerald eyes burned with determination. Mark froze for a moment. Adam Eve. He had seen her in the comics during his past life, but here, in person, she was breathtaking. For a second, he forgot where he was, transfixed by her beauty. "Focus," she called out, breaking him from his thoughts. "We've got a lot of these guys to handle." Snapping out of it, Mark nodded. "Name's Invincible," he said, stepping forward and punching a Flaxon so hard it flew back into its comrades. "Nice to meet you." "Welcome to the fight, Invincible," she said with a small smirk, her hands glowing as she created another energy shield to block incoming fire. More flashes of light signaled the arrival of additional heroes. Rexplode leaped into action, his explosive attacks tearing through enemy ranks. Duplicate multiplied herself, overwhelming the Flaxons with sheer numbers, while Robot barked orders, coordinating the team's efforts. "Who's the new guy?" Rex called out, lobbing an explosive coin at a Flaxon soldier. "Invincible," Eve said as she deflected a blast with her energy constructs. "And he's strong, really strong." "Good," Robot said, as he dodged a swing from a Flaxon. "We could use the help." Mark didn't waste time with introductions. He dove back into the fight, his fists ablur as he tore through the Flaxon forces. He noticed the team was coordinated, but the sheer number of enemies was starting to overwhelm them. Mark took it upon himself to handle the bulk of the army, drawing their fire and keeping the team from being overrun. Mark fought with precision, taking on the majority of the army while keeping the team from being overrun. But his focus wasn't on victory, at least, not yet. He was watching, waiting, and keeping track of the time. The Flaxons might have overwhelming numbers, but Mark knew their biology couldn't sustain itself on Earth. They'll start aging soon, he thought, dodging a blast and countering with a devastating punch. I just have to hold the line until then. The battle raged on, the team holding their ground as best they could. Eve's energy constructs shielded civilians and redirected enemy fire, while Rex's explosive attacks scattered their ranks. Duplicate and Robot provided much-needed reinforcements, but the team was clearly starting to tire. Mark noticed Eve falter slightly, and his instincts kicked in. Without thinking, Mark launched himself in her direction. "Eve, watch out!" he shouted, throwing himself in front of the shot. The blast hit his back, the force knocking him forward, but he stayed upright, shielding Eve with his body. She turned to him, her eyes wide. "You okay?" Mark grinned. "Takes more than that to hurt me." Eve's expression softened briefly before she turned back to the battle. "Thanks." Finally, it happened. The Flaxon soldiers began to falter. Their movements slowed, their attacks less precise. Armor-clad bodies began collapsing, their once formidable forms withering with age. Mark smirked. "Right on schedule." "They're aging." Robot shouted, confirming what Mark already knew. "They can't sustain themselves here much longer." As the Flaxons retreated toward their portals, the team regrouped. Exhausted but victorious, they watched as their enemies began to crumble under the weight of their own biology. For the others, this might have seemed like the end of the battle. But for Mark, it was only the beginning. He turned his gaze toward the largest portal. Before anyone could react, Mark launched himself toward the portal. Eve's eyes widened in alarm as she realized what he was doing. "Invincible," she called out, her voice desperate. "Wait. Don't." Her words were cut off as Mark disappeared into the swirling vortex, the portal's energy rippling in his wake. Mark emerged from the swirling portal into a world of harsh, oppressive heat. The sky above glowed dimly with the red light of a sun that began to sap his Kryptonian abilities. For now, the solar batteries in his invincible suit kept him fully powered, but he knew they wouldn't last forever. He surveyed the sprawling alien city before him. Towering structures of metal and glass stretched toward the crimson sky, and Flaxon soldiers moved in precise battalions. This was their home turf, but Mark was strong enough that it didn't matter. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself. This wasn't just a battle, it was a mission to cripple an entire society. He reached for the collar of his suit, stripping it off piece by piece until he stood exposed to the red sun's rays. His body tensed as the energy drain intensified, but that was the point. He needed to grow stronger without relying on the yellow sun's radiation. He had to strengthen his Viltrumite side, preparing for future battles in places where red suns dominated. He needed to be ready for the real threats: Battle Beast, Thrag, and the Viltrumite Empire. I launched myself off the ground, heading straight for the tallest structure I could see. It looked like a palace, a good enough place to start. As I flew, Flaxon soldiers opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the air around me. I dodged easily, feeling the thrill of combat building in my chest. When I landed on the roof, the entire building trembled beneath the impact. Soldiers scrambled to respond, their shouts echoing in an alien language. They charged at me with weapons drawn, and I grinned. Perfect. The first soldier swung at me with a blade glowing blue-hot. I caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted, the sickening crack confirming my grip strength. "Impressive tech," I said, tossing him into a group of his comrades. "But you have no idea who you're dealing with." Each punch sent shockwaves through the air, their exosuits shattering under my fists. My movements felt heavier than they did on Earth. The red sun was taking its toll. But I pushed through it. Every strike, every dodge, was a reminder. This wasn't just a fight, it was training. The toll of the red sun became undeniable as days turned into weeks. I felt it every time I moved, a slight lag in my punches, the weight in my limbs. But something wasn't adding up. It wasn't draining me as fast as I expected. One night, sitting amidst the ruins of a Flaxon command center, I flexed my fingers, feeling the tension in my muscles. Why am I still this strong? I muttered aloud. By now, I should be at mid-season 1 Mark levels of strength and speed, the guy who struggled to stop an asteroid. Then it hit me, the Codex. The knowledge it had implanted in me rushed back, the way my Kryptonian and Viltrumite genes interacted, the adaptability of my hybrid physiology. My Viltrumite genes were compensating, having adapted to my previous levels of strength and speed under the yellow sun, and reinforcing my Viltrumite strength. Even under this red sun, I was holding on to my powers longer than a regular Kryptonian ever could. I chuckled, leaning back against a crumbling wall. I'm not just getting stronger, I'm evolving. That's awesome. By the end of the 5th week, the drain of the red sun stopped affecting Mark entirely and left him about as strong as Anissa when she came to Earth. The Flaxan population had been reduced to a desperate few. Their once thriving civilization was in ruins, its infrastructure shattered, and its people near extinct. But they weren't finished yet. The last remaining military leader, driven mad by grief and rage, made one final attempt to stop Mark. Strapping himself with a makeshift bomb of Flaxan energy cores, the leader charged at him, screaming incoherently. Mark didn't flinch. As the leader lunged, Mark grabbed him midair and hurled him skyward. The explosion erupted harmlessly above, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Mark stood in the ashes of their civilization, his chest heaving. It's done, he thought. They'll never come back to Earth again, and I can finally use this dimension as my personal fortress of solitude. Between battles, Mark used what little downtime he had to learn. Using his Kryptonian enhanced intelligence, he began deciphering the Flaxan language. After dismantling their military infrastructure and decimating their population, Mark turned his attention to what remained, their science and engineering. The codex in his mind provided a foundation, a wealth of Kryptonian knowledge that allowed him to understand concepts that would have otherwise taken years to grasp. But with the Flaxan's technology at his disposal, Mark wasn't content to just learn, he was determined to innovate. One of Mark's first projects was redesigning his Invincible suit. While armor was practical, he didn't like it. He wanted something more flexible, something that could adapt as fast as he could. Using Flaxan nanotechnology and insights from the Codex on chemical engineering, Mark conceptualized a suit that was more than just clothing, it would be an extension of himself. The process took weeks of trial and error. The result was a groundbreaking environmentally adaptable fabric. The suit wasn't just clothing, it was a living system, powered by a small solar core that absorbed and stored energy. Mark ensured that the suit's energy requirements were minimal so that the majority of the stored solar energy could fuel his Kryptonian powers. The suit had several key features. Mental morphing. The suit was designed to respond to Mark's mental commands, allowing it to morph into different forms, including weapons, shields, or even new configurations tailored to specific scenarios. Environmental adaptation. The fabric adjusted to environmental conditions, providing warmth in extreme cold, cooling in intense heat, or even camouflage in hostile territories. Energy efficiency. Powered by a compact solar core, the suit's energy needs were minimal, leaving most of the stored energy for Mark's Kryptonian abilities. Durability and regeneration. The Flaxan nanotechnology made the fabric self-repairing, ensuring it could withstand extreme conditions and regenerate after sustaining damage. Mark poured weeks into designing and crafting the suit. He used Flaxan molecular engineering to weave nanobots into the fabric, allowing it to respond to his thoughts seamlessly. The solar core was a breakthrough in efficiency, capable of storing immense energy without taking up significant space. During the first test, Mark stood in front of a reflective surface, wearing his eye mask and the new suit in its default form, a sleek blue and yellow design reminiscent of his original Invincible costume with the eye logo covering the solar core. "All right," he muttered, focusing on the suit. "Let's see if this works." The fabric rippled like water, shifting and reconfiguring. In an instant, a blade extended from his right arm, gleaming under the dim light. Mark turned his hand, and the blade morphed into a shield, its surface shimmering with a faint energy glow. "Not bad, I could add my tactile telekinesis shield on top of this one to make my shields even stronger," Mark said, a grin spreading across his face. He concentrated again, and the suit shifted back to its original form. "This is going to be fun." With the completion of his suit, Mark moved on to his next project. Using the Flaxan's advanced medical chambers and diagnostic systems, Mark began an in-depth study of his own biology. The Codex provided invaluable insights, but the Flaxan tech allowed him to visualize the intricacies of his hybrid physiology in ways he never imagined. His findings were both fascinating and exhilarating. The combination of his Kryptonian and Viltrumite DNA created a unique interplay. Kryptonian cells with Viltrumite smart atoms. His Kryptonian cells, designed to absorb and store yellow sun radiation, were fused with Viltrumite smart atoms. This made the cells far more adaptable and efficient than a standard Kryptonian's. Enhanced solar energy storage. The Viltrumite enhancements allowed his cells to store and process yellow sun energy at a higher rate, making his Kryptonian powers more potent than even long-exposed Kryptonians like Superman. Improved adaptability. The smart atoms allowed his cells to adapt to environmental conditions more quickly. Under a red sun, his Kryptonian abilities didn't fade as rapidly, and his Viltrumite physiology compensated for any weaknesses. "This explains everything," Mark murmured, staring at a holographic projection of his cellular structure. "I'm not just a Kryptonian with Viltrumite traits or a Viltrumite with Kryptonian powers. I'm something entirely new." He also used the flaxen medical tech to build a regeneration chamber, a device that could heal injuries, restore energy, and even optimize his cells for better efficiency. "I hate the idea of having weaknesses. I need to build immunity to high-frequency sonic waves," he said as he finished calibrating the chamber. With his biological studies complete, Mark turned his focus to physical training. The flaxen's gravitational technology intrigued him, and he wasted no time building a high-gravity training chamber. The chamber could simulate gravity hundreds of times stronger than Earth's, forcing Mark's body to adapt to extreme conditions. Each session in the chamber was grueling. Strength training. Mark lifted massive flaxen machinery, pushing his muscles to their limits. Speed drills. High-speed drones zipped through the chamber, firing energy bolts to train Mark's reflexes and agility. Endurance tests. Mark spent hours flying against simulated gravitational pull, honing his stamina. Martial arts. Mark incorporated Torquazumrao and Torquazumbo, Kryptonian martial arts, into his martial skill set. Torquazumrao taught Mark discipline, control, and focus. Torquazumbo strengthened Mark's mental defenses, making him nearly invulnerable to psychic attacks or emotional manipulation. But the gravity chamber wasn't his only innovation. Using flaxen holographic technology, he created a sparring room capable of generating holographic copies of himself. These clones mirrored his movements, forcing him to fight opponents who thought, moved, and struck like he did. The first time he sparred with 3 holographic copies of himself, he barely kept up. "Damn, I'm good," he muttered, wiping blood from his lip after taking a hard hit. But each session made him faster, sharper, and more disciplined. Mark didn't stop at biology and training. He also delved into the flaxen's weaponry and interdimensional technology. Their energy weapons, while powerful, weren't perfect. Mark reverse-engineered them, memorizing their best features with his Kryptonian brain while discarding the flaws. Their portal technology, however, was a different challenge. Mark spent weeks studying the mechanics of their dimensional travel, experimenting with ways to control and stabilize the portals. He knew this knowledge would be invaluable, not just for returning to Earth, but for potential future battles across dimensions. By the end of his study, Mark had refined the flaxen portal device into his special suit so he could open portals with his mind. "It's sort of similar to Angstrom-Levy's powers," he said, testing the new system. "But to perfect it, I need Levy to study how his powers worked." Mark stood in the ruins of a flaxen facility, his newly upgraded suit shimmering faintly in the dim red sunlight. His body ached from weeks of relentless training, and his mind buzzed with ideas. The flaxen technology had given him tools to enhance his strength and intellect, but there was a deeper power he wanted to explore, something far more enigmatic than his physical abilities. Kryptonian Magi. The thought lingered in his mind, dredged up from fragments of memories implanted by the Codex and his past life. He recalled reading in Superman comics about how Kryptonian Magi were once powerful wielders of magic, isolating themselves as their civilization turned toward science and technology. The Codex within his soul wasn't just a key to Krypton's genetic legacy, it was a repository of knowledge and potential. And it had something he wanted, the genetic blueprint of the Magi. If they could harness magic through their genes, Mark muttered to himself, pacing the facility's central chamber, then so can I. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. The Codex wasn't just a source of knowledge, it was part of him. Its presence resonated in his soul, humming with untapped potential. If he could find the genetic material tied to the Magi, he might unlock something Kryptonians had long since abandoned. Mark began by using the flaxen medical chambers to map his own genetic code. As he examined the results, the Codex's influence revealed itself. Strands of Kryptonian DNA shimmered with potential, the markers for his Kryptonian and Viltrumite traits intertwining seamlessly. "There it is," Mark whispered, his eyes narrowing as he identified the dormant sequence. Buried deep within his Kryptonian DNA was the inactive genetic code of the Magi. It wasn't entirely dormant, the codex ensured it remained viable. All he had to do was awaken it. The process was delicate and dangerous. Using the Flaxen bioengineering tools, Mark created a series of targeted genetic activators. He knew he was playing with fire. Manipulating his own DNA could have unintended consequences, but he couldn't resist the allure of unlocking magic. As the activators worked, Mark felt a strange warmth spread through his body. His senses sharpened, and the world around him seemed to glow faintly with an aura he hadn't noticed before. "It's working," he breathed, a grin spreading across his face. This is incredible." The first sign of success came during a sparring session with his holographic clones. As Mark dodged a strike, his body instinctively emitted a faint pulse of energy, sending the clone staggering backward. He froze, staring at his hands. He spent the next several days testing his abilities, meditating, and focusing on the energy coursing through him. Unlike his Kryptonian powers, which were fueled by the sun, or his Viltrumite strength, which was intrinsic, this energy felt different, more fluid, more malleable. Mark delved deeper into the Codex's knowledge of the Kryptonian Magi. He discovered that their magic wasn't purely mystical, it was a fusion of biological adaptation and universal energy manipulation. With this understanding, Mark began to push his limits. He experimented with spells, using mental constructs derived from his Codex-enhanced intellect, elemental control. Mark summoned gusts of wind and created small flames, manipulating the environment to his advantage. Augmentation. By channeling magic through his body, he temporarily enhanced his speed and strength, amplifying his Viltrumite abilities. Dimensional anchoring. Using his understanding of Flaxen portal technology, Mark experimented with magic to stabilize and redirect dimensional energy, making his dimensional portal stronger. Mastering magic wasn't without its struggles. Unlike his Kryptonian and Viltrumite powers, magic required precision and patience. Mark's frustration often bubbled over during failed attempts. During one training session, Mark attempted to create a teleportation spell. The energy backfired, sending him tumbling across the chamber. Groaning, he picked himself up, glaring at the faint scorch mark on the floor. But each failure only fueled his determination. The Codex's knowledge gave him a roadmap, and his hybrid physiology ensured he could withstand the strain. Slowly but surely, Mark's control improved. As Mark's abilities grew, he uncovered an astonishing truth about his hybrid nature. With his Kryptonian cells being enhanced by the Viltrumite smart atoms, this adaptation amplified his Kryptonian magical potential. The smart atoms are acting like a magical amplifier, Mark realized during one of his meditative sessions. They're taking the energy I channel and boosting it, making my spells more potent. This is insane. The realization was exhilarating. 3 years in the Flaxen dimension had changed Mark in every way. Physically, he was stronger, faster, and more resilient. His Kryptonian Viltrumite biology had adapted beyond anything he thought possible, and his training had pushed his Viltrumite base abilities to new heights. Mentally, he was sharper and more focused. The Codex, combined with Flaxen technology, had expanded his understanding of science, engineering, and strategy. He wasn't just a fighter anymore, he was a tactician, an innovator, and a force to be reckoned with. As he stood in his newly upgraded suit, the fabric shimmering as it adjusted to his movements, Mark surveyed the ruins of the Flaxen civilization. He felt no regret for what he had done. This was necessary for his own growth, and now he had his own personal dimension that he locked down to outsiders using his magic. "I'm not just invincible," he said, a confident grin spreading across his face. "I've got magic now. The universe doesn't stand a chance." With that, he activated the portal and stepped through, ready to return to Earth and face whatever awaited him. Mark stepped through the shimmering portal and back onto Earth. The rush of yellow sunlight hit him immediately, and he closed his eyes as his Kryptonian cells surged with renewed energy. It was almost overwhelming. 3 years of red sun exposure in the Flaxen dimension had dulled his abilities, but now, under the yellow sun, he felt invincible. His strength doubled with each passing second, his senses sharpening to a level that made the world around him seem clearer than ever before. The air smelled fresher, the light was brighter, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt at home. Adjusting the environmentally adaptable suit that had been his second skin in the Flaxen dimension, Mark glanced down at his beard and chuckled. I look like I've been through hell. Well, I guess I have. As the portal closed behind him, he turned to see the teen team standing nearby, waiting with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Adam Eve, Rexplode, Duplicate, and Robot looked like they hadn't moved from the spot since he'd entered the portal. Invincible. Adam Eve said, her voice filled with equal parts relief and bewilderment. That was fast. Not for me, Mark replied, scratching his beard. Time works differently over there. You've been gone, like, 30 minutes, Rex added, crossing his arms. What the hell happened? Mark sighed, deciding to stick to the story he'd rehearsed. When I got there, I was captured by the Flaxons and thrown into a prison camp. It wasn't just me, though. There was another prisoner, an alien who'd been there for decades. He taught me a lot. Eve frowned, her eyes narrowing. Taught you what? Mark responded. How to fight better. How to push myself past my limits. And, most importantly, he taught me magic. Magic? Rex said skeptically. Yeah, right. Mark raised his hand, summoning a small orb of energy that crackled with a faint glow. The team stared in stunned silence as the orb hovered for a moment before dissipating. After I trained with him, Mark continued, I was strong enough to lead a revolt. We overthrew the Flaxon government, and I used my magic to lock down the dimension. No one from either side can cross over again. That's incredible, Eve said softly, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. Mark shrugged. It was a long 3 years, but it's done now. Anyway, I need a shower. I'll see you all around. Without waiting for a reply, he launched into the sky, leaving the teen team behind. Mark flew straight to the Global Defense Agency headquarters. Landing at the building's entrance, he made his way inside, nodding to the agents who gave him curious glances. In one of the observation rooms, he found Debbie sitting by Nolan's bed. She looked up, and her expression shifted from worry to overwhelming relief. Mark! She exclaimed, rushing to him. She threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. You're okay. I was so worried when you went through that portal. Mark hugged her back, his grin softening. I'm fine, Mom. Really? She pulled back, looking him over. You look different. Older. What happened? Mark chuckled. Time moves differently where I was. It's a long story, but I learned a lot. Debbie nodded, her expression turning apologetic. I'm sorry, Mark. I feel like I've been neglecting you. With everything going on with your dad. Mark shook his head. It's okay, Mom. Honestly, the time away did me good. I'm so much stronger now, ready for anything. Before Debbie could respond, Nolan stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he let out a soft groan. Debbie gasped, rushing to his side. Nolan, you're awake. Mark stepped back slightly as his father's eyes adjusted, locking onto him. For a moment, there was silence as Nolan scanned his son. His gaze lingered on the slight changes in Mark's frame, the subtle signs of greater strength, and the beard that hadn't been there before. Mark, Nolan said, his voice low. You look different. Stronger. Mark shrugged, trying to keep his tone casual. You know me. Always training. Nolan's brow furrowed, but he said nothing more. Debbie interrupted the tension, smiling through her tears. Let's get you home, Nolan. It's time for all of us to get back to normal. The following morning, Mark stood in the backyard of their home, freshly shaved and ready to spar. He stretched, the yellow sun warming his skin as Nolan approached, dressed casually but exuding his usual air of authority. You've been training, Nolan said, his tone even but his eyes sharp. I can see it. Mark smirked, stretching his arms. 3 years of non-stop training. I'm not the same guy I was before. You're not even going to touch me. Nolan raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of amusement tugging at his lips. Big words. Let's see if you can back them up. Mark took his stance, the air around him humming with the subtle energy of his prepared muscles. You asked for it. Nolan moved first, a blur of speed as he lunged at Mark with a punch that would have flattened most opponents. But Mark was faster. He sidestepped effortlessly, his movements precise and fluid. Nolan's fist struck empty air. Nolan pressed harder, throwing a flurry of punches and kicks, each one calculated and devastating. But no matter how fast or strong he moved, Mark was always a step ahead. His reflexes were sharper, his speed blinding. Nolan couldn't land a single hit. Mark grinned, relishing the moment. "Come on, Dad. I thought you were supposed to be the strongest." Nolan's frustration built, and he launched himself at Mark with all his strength. But Mark caught the punch midair, twisting his father's arm and sending him sprawling with a single palm strike to the chest. Nolan hit the ground hard, staring up at his son in disbelief. "Not bad, huh?" Mark said, extending a hand to help him up. Nolan accepted the hand, pulling himself to his feet. His mind raced as he studied his son. "He's not just stronger than me, he's far beyond anything I expected. This could complicate things, but I can't deny it. I'm proud of him." "You've come a long way, Mark," Nolan said, brushing himself off. "I'm proud of you." Mark smiled, though there was a glint of determination in his eyes. "Thanks, Dad. But this is just the beginning. I'm going to keep getting stronger." Nolan nodded, though inwardly his thoughts churned. His strength might make things difficult. But he's still my son. When the time comes, I'll need to get him loyal to the Viltrum Empire. Mark strolled into school, his backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. The morning buzz of students filled the halls as he approached the lockers, where his best friend William stood waiting. "Morning, Will," Mark greeted, his tone casual. "Hey, Mun," William replied, closing his locker. "Did you see the news last night? That new hero, Invincible? The dude's insane. He took on an alien invasion, flew into their portal, and came back with a beard." Mark chuckled, scratching his freshly shaved chin. "Yeah, I heard about it." William leaned in conspiratorially. "Can you imagine? One minute you're stopping a robbery, and the next, you're leading a revolt in some alien dimension. That guy's got to be hardcore." Mark smirked. "I'm all right, I guess." William blinked, his brow furrowing as he processed Mark's words. "Wait. What?" "I'm invincible," Mark said with a nonchalant shrug. William froze, staring at Mark like he'd just announced he was an alien. "You're joking." Mark shook his head, his smirk growing wider. "Not joking." William grabbed Mark's shoulders, his eyes wide. "Wait, you're serious? You're invincible? The guy who fought aliens, flew into their portal, and came back with a freaking beard." "That's me," Mark replied, enjoying his friend's reaction. "Though the beard's gone now." William's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to form words. "You're a superhero. My best friend is a superhero. And you didn't think to mention this before." Mark shrugged. "Secret identity and all that. Plus, I figured it'd be more fun to tell you this way." William groaned, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe this. You're just casually dropping this bombshell on me like it's no big deal." Before Mark could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Hey, Mark," Amber said, walking up with a confident smile. Mark turned to Amber, giving her a friendly nod. "Hey, Amber." Amber leaned against the lockers beside him, her smile playful. "So, I was wondering, got any plans this weekend? There's this art exhibit downtown I think you'd like." Mark hesitated for a moment, but before he could respond, he caught sight of a familiar face further down the hall, Adam Eve. Without thinking, he straightened up, his attention shifting. "Sorry, Amber," Mark said, stepping away. "I'll have to get back to you on that." Amber's smile faltered. "Wait, what?" Mark walked toward Eve, leaving Amber standing there in stunned silence. She turned to William, her arms crossed. "Is he dating her or something?" William, still reeling from the earlier revelation, shrugged. "I don't know anything anymore." Amber huffed, crossing her arms. "Unbelievable." She stormed off, muttering under her breath. Mark stopped in front of Eve, who was busy grabbing books from her locker. "Hey," he said, his tone casual. We didn't get a chance to talk much yesterday. Eve glanced up, her brow furrowing. Do I know you? Mark smirked. Guess you don't recognize me without the beard. Eve's eyes widened as realization hit her. Wait, you're Invincible? Guilty as charged, name's Mark Grayson. Mark replied, shrugging. The clean-shaven look threw you off, huh? Eve laughed softly, closing her locker. Well, that's not something you hear every day. Name is Samantha Eve Wilkins. What are you doing here? School, Mark said simply. Gotta keep up appearances, right? Eve studied him for a moment. You don't seem like a rookie with the way you fought yesterday. Mark shrugged. I've trained a lot. My dad's been a hero for years, so I guess it runs in the family. Really? Eve asked, intrigued. Who's your dad? Mark hesitated, keeping his tone light. Just someone who's been around a while. Eve nodded, clearly curious but not pressing further. Well, welcome to the world of superheroing, Invincible. You should come by the Teen Team HQ sometime. I think the others would like to meet you. Mark grinned. Sounds like fun. After school. As they left the school grounds, Eve glanced at Mark with a mischievous glint in her eye. Teen Team HQ isn't far from here. You ready to fly? Mark smirked. Always. Without warning, Eve shot into the air, a trail of pink energy shimmering behind her. Try to keep up, Invincible, she called over her shoulder. Mark grinned. His school clothes shifted into his invincible costume and launched himself into the sky, the wind whipping past his face as he quickly closed the distance between them. The city stretched out below, a blur of buildings and streets as the two heroes raced across the skyline. You're pretty fast, Eve called out, her voice teasing as Mark caught up beside her. But can you do this? With a flick of her hands, Eve created a glowing pink ramp in midair, using it to slingshot herself forward. The sudden burst of speed widened the gap between them. Mark laughed, his voice carrying through the wind. Not bad, but watch this. He leaned forward, pushing his speed to the limit. The air around him rippled as he broke through Eve's lead, the pressure building around him like a sonic boom. He glanced back with a cocky grin. Still keeping up? Eve smirked, unfazed. You're not the only one with tricks. She conjured a series of energy platforms, bouncing off each one with incredible agility. The pink light danced around her as she darted ahead of Mark, her movements fluid and precise. Mark couldn't help but admire her skill. She's good, he thought. But he wasn't about to let her win. He tilted his body, angling downward to use gravity to his advantage, then shot back up, intercepting her path just as they neared the industrial district where the HQ was located. Eve's eyes widened slightly as Mark pulled ahead, but she quickly recovered, grinning as they approached the Teen Team building. The two landed on the rooftop almost simultaneously, their laughter echoing in the quiet evening air. Not bad, Eve said, brushing her hair out of her face. For a rookie. Mark smirked, crossing his arms. Rookie? I just beat you. Barely, Eve shot back, her smile playful. Let's call it a tie. Mark chuckled. Deal. That was fun. Eve gestured toward the entrance. Come on, let's head inside. The others are probably wondering where we are. As they walked into the HQ, Mark couldn't shake the grin on his face. Flying's fun, but flying with her? Even better. The Teen Team headquarters was tucked away in an industrial area, its exterior unassuming but hiding state-of-the-art technology inside. As they entered, Mark took in the futuristic design, his eyes darting between the advanced tech lining the walls and the familiar faces waiting for them. Rex Splode was the first to speak, his voice dripping with sarcasm. So, this is the guy who stole all the glory yesterday? Rex, Eve warned, shooting him a look. What? Rex said, throwing up his hands. I'm just saying. He looks like he's already got a big head. Mark smirked, unbothered. Nice to meet you too. Duplicate offered a polite smile. Ignore him. He's always like this. Robot approached, his mechanical form whirring softly. Your suit, it's remarkable. May I inquire about the material? Mark glanced at Eve, who nodded encouragingly. He extended his arm, and the suit rippled, forming a blade that glinted under the fluorescent lights. It's adaptable. Robot sensors focused on the transformation. Fascinating. Did you design it yourself? Mark nodded. Yeah. I made it while studying flaxen technology. Took a lot of trial and error, but it was worth it. Robot tilted his head slightly, his curiosity clearly piqued. I would like to study it further. The material could provide invaluable insights. Mark shook his head, his tone firm but polite. Sorry, not happening. It's one of a kind, and I'm keeping it that way. Robot sensors whirred faintly, but he nodded in understanding. I respect your decision. Eve chuckled. Don't take it personally, Robot. Mark's just protective of his work. The rest of the visit was filled with casual conversation and playful banter. Mark quickly realized that Rex was just as much of a jerk as he'd seemed in the comics, but the rest of the team was welcoming. By the time he left, he felt comfortable with the team and left them his contact in case they needed his help. Underneath the dim light of the Guardians of the Globe's headquarters, Cecil Stedman stood amidst the aftermath of the massacre. The room was eerily silent, the metallic tang of blood still lingering in the air. The walls were splattered with crimson streaks, and the bodies of the Guardians had already been carefully removed, leaving only the brutal signs of their struggle behind. Cecil adjusted his coat and sighed. Whoever did this didn't just kill, they sent a message. A low growl of disapproval interrupted his thoughts. Blood speaks, came the raspy voice of Damien Darkblood as he emerged from the shadows, his glowing eyes scanning the room. Cecil didn't flinch. He had grown accustomed to the demon detective's unnerving presence. What do you see, Damien? He asked, his voice steady. Darkblood knelt near a darkened stain on the floor, his clawed fingers tracing the edge of a massive blood splatter. Violence. Precision. Rage, he muttered, his voice gravelly. This was not a battle, it was an execution. Cecil nodded grimly. That much is clear. The Guardians didn't stand a chance. Darkblood straightened, his trench coat swaying as he turned to face Cecil. The question isn't how. It's why. And by whom. Cecil sighed, rubbing his temples. It's a mess. And it's going to stay a mess unless we get control of this narrative. Darkblood turned to face Cecil, his raspy voice cutting through the quiet. Omniman. Last one standing. Blood tells his story. Cecil took a step closer, his tone sharp. And what? You think accusing Earth's greatest hero of murdering its greatest team is going to help anyone? You don't have proof, Damien. Darkblood gestured to the bloodstains, the shattered armor, and the destruction surrounding them. Proof is here. In blood. In carnage. You choose not to see. Cecil's voice rose, his frustration boiling over. I don't need you telling me what I see. What I see is a situation that could destroy this planet if handled wrong. If Nolan did this, and I'm not saying he did, we don't need you stirring the pot. Darkblood stepped closer, his glowing eyes blazing with intensity. Truth must come to light. Secrets will destroy you. Cecil's face darkened, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. You think you're untouchable, huh? You're only here because I let you be here. You keep pushing this, and I'll send you straight back to hell. Darkblood held Cecil's gaze for a long moment before stepping back, his trench coat swaying as he turned toward the shadows. You fear the truth. But it's already here. Blood whispers, and it doesn't lie. Without another word, the demon detective disappeared into the darkness, leaving Cecil standing alone amidst the wreckage. He exhaled sharply, adjusting his glasses as he turned to face the scene. If it's him, we're not ready. Not yet, he thought, his mind already racing with contingency plans. Looking at the blood-stained walls one last time, Cecil muttered under his breath, Nolan, you better have a damn good explanation for this. The Grayson household was peaceful that morning. Debbie hummed softly as she flipped pancakes, Nolan sat at the table with his newspaper and coffee, and Mark leaned against the counter, still waking up. While his body didn't need to sleep with his Kryptonian physiology, his mind couldn't get rid of the habit from his human years. A sudden knock at the door broke the tranquility. Debbie frowned, setting the spatula down as she went to answer it. Standing at the door was Cecil Stedman, his signature calm but stern expression immediately putting the household on edge. "Cecil," Debbie asked, "what brings you here?" Cecil stepped inside, nodding to Debbie before turning his attention to Nolan. "We've got a situation. He's back." Mark tilted his head, intrigued. "What's going on?" Cecil ignored the question, focusing on Nolan. "You've encountered him before." Nolan folded his newspaper with a deliberate slowness, his eyes narrowing. "If it's who I think it is, it's not a big deal. Just some alien that shows up every now and then. I fight him for a while, he gives up, and I throw him back into space." Mark inwardly thought. "Alan." Cecil continued. "He just passed Mars and will be in our atmosphere within 15 minutes. Debbie glanced at Nolan, worried. "What are you talking about? Nolan just got out of the hospital." Nolan sighed. "This guy is not that tough, just super annoying. I'll handle it real quick." Mark stepped forward, his expression confident. "I've got this." All eyes turned to him as his casual clothes shimmered and morphed into his invincible suit, the adaptable fabric responding instantly to his thoughts. Debbie raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Do you always have that on?" Mark smirked. "Pretty much." Nolan studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. "Just hold your breath. You don't need to breathe in space." Mark returned the nod, his grin widening. "Got it." Cecil opened his mouth to say something, but Mark was already gone, launching himself into the sky with a sonic boom. Breaking through Earth's atmosphere, Mark slowed his ascent, letting the golden rays of the sun wash over him. His Kryptonian cells surged with energy, the warmth of the sunlight amplifying his already immense strength. "This feels incredible," he thought, his senses sharpening as he basked in the sunlight. His supervision flickered, scanning the vast expanse of space. That's when he saw it, an orange blur moving at incredible speed, headed straight for him. Mark tilted slightly, floating out of the blur's path with ease. Mark shifted slightly, casually floating out of the blur's path. The figure zipped by, stopping and turning back. It was a muscular orange alien with only a single eye. The alien grinned, communicating with Mark's mind. "You're good. Let's see what else you've got." Mark smirked. "All right, let's dance." Alan unleashed a flurry of punches, each one faster than the last, but Mark met them with ease. Dodging, blocking, and countering, he found himself enjoying the spar. "Not bad," Mark thought. "But let's see how you handle this." Mark suddenly closed the distance, throwing a punch that connected squarely with Alan's chest. The impact sent Alan hurtling through space, tumbling uncontrollably until he collided with the surface of the moon. Mark winced. "Oops. Didn't mean to hit that hard." Alan floated back into view, coughing blood and clutching his abdomen. "Okay. You've got a hell of a punch." Mark approached cautiously, his concern evident. "You all right?" "No," Alan telepathically communicated, his voice laced with pain. "Pretty sure I am dying." Mark placed a hand on Alan's wound, summoning the magical energy he had honed during his time in the Flaxen dimension. A soft golden light enveloped Alan's injury, quickly knitting the torn muscles and organs back together. Alan blinked, his expression shifting to surprise. "What was that?" "Magic," Mark replied. Unbeknownst to either of them, Alan's body began to subtly change. Mark didn't know it, but his single casual punch put Alan in a near-death state, triggering Alan's innate ability to grow stronger after recovering from severe injury. The process was slow but already taking effect. Alan rubbed his abdomen. "Well, you're officially the coolest guy I've fought. And trust me, I've fought a lot. My name is Alan, by the way," Mark chuckled. "Mark Grayson, what are you doing here?" Alan shrugged. "The coalition of planets sent me. Standard procedure. Gotta test Urath as champion and make sure you can handle any big threats. You passed." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Urath," he said, correcting him with a small smirk. "This is Earth." Alan blinked, tilting his head in confusion. "What?" "This is Earth," Mark repeated, his tone amused. "Not Urath." Alan's eyes widened, his hand still clutching his healed wound. Wait. Are you serious? Did I? Oh, no. I'm at the wrong planet. This is so embarrassing. I need to— Hold on, Mark interrupted, raising a hand to stop Alan as the alien began to panic and turn to leave. You said you were sent to test Earth's, or Uratha's, protector, right? What exactly are you protecting it from? Alan hesitated, his expression growing serious. Well, it's complicated. Mark floated closer, his expression calm but his tone probing. I've got time. Alan sighed, the humor in his telepathic voice replaced by a weightier tone. There's this empire. The Viltrumite Empire. They're the worst kind of threat, a conquering race of superpowered beings who don't stop until every planet in their path bends to their will. The coalition of planets sent me to make sure Urath has someone strong enough to handle them if they ever decide to show up here. Mark kept his face neutral, though inwardly his heart raced. He's finally talking about it. After a moment, he spoke, his voice steady. I know about the Viltrumites. Alan's eyes narrowed, his wariness immediately returning. You know about them? How? Because I am one, Mark said, his tone calm and deliberate. Alan froze, his glowing eyes widening in disbelief. He instinctively floated back, his body tensing. You're Viltrumite. His telepathic voice carried a mixture of shock and alarm. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not, Mark said calmly, holding his hands up to calm the alien. But hear me out, I'm not like them. Alan didn't relax, his voice sharper. How can I believe that? Viltrumites don't protect planets, they conquer them. Mark floated closer, his tone measured. I'm half Viltrumite. My dad is one of them, but my mom is human. I was raised here, on Earth. And I'm not interested in destroying this planet. I quite like it, he joked. Alan studied Mark for a long moment, his gaze searching. If your dad's here, it's not by accident. Viltrumites don't just settle down on random planets. He's here for a reason. I know, Mark admitted. That's why I want to understand more about the Viltrumites. What I'm up against. Alan's eyes softened slightly, though his caution remained. You're serious about this? You're not just saying it to get me off your back. Mark nodded, his gaze steady. Dead serious. If I wanted to conquer Earth, I wouldn't be standing here trying to convince you I'm on its side. Alan sighed, his tense posture relaxing slightly. Well, if you're telling the truth, you might just be the best hope Earth has. He reached into a small compartment on his belt, pulling out a sleek, circular device. Here. It's a coalition communicator. It's encrypted, only I or the coalition leaders can send messages to it. I'll report this to the coalition. They'll want to know about you and give you a call. Mark took the device, gripping it tightly. Thanks. I'll be sure to answer. Alan hesitated for a moment before nodding. I hope you're as different as you say you are. Because if the Viltrumites find out you're not on their side, they'll come for you. And they won't stop until you're dead. Mark smirked faintly, the fire in his eyes undeniable. Let them come. I'm ready. Alan chuckled faintly, though the weight of his words lingered. You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. He floated back. With that, Alan gave a mock salute and shot off into the void, leaving Mark floating in the golden sunlight, gripping the communicator in his hand. Mark smirked to himself. He intended to use Alan as a catalyst to hasten the Viltrum Empire's arrival. Knowing there were Viltrumite moles within the Coalition Council, he planned for Alan to report his presence back to the Coalition, setting his strategy into motion. Mark continued to float in space, enjoying the feeling of the sun as he grew stronger. He contemplated dipping into the sun, but he wasn't sure if his suit could survive the temperatures of the sun just yet. He'll have to test that out. For now he just glided through space, drinking in the sun's rays. The real funeral for the Guardians of the Globe was somber and quiet, a heavy rain falling as mourners gathered around their graves. Mark sat beside Eve, dressed in a simple black suit, his mind racing as Nolan stood at the podium delivering a heartfelt eulogy. Nolan's voice was steady as he spoke about heroism and sacrifice, but Mark could see through the facade. While the world mourned their fallen heroes, Mark was thinking about his father, the man he loved but knew was torn between his family and his purpose. Despite everything, Mark had decided to change his father's mind or beat him up until he changed it. He may have already had a father in his past life, but the feeling he felt as he grew didn't change, that he still cared about Nolan as his father. Mark's focus shifted momentarily to his ultimate plan, proving to the Viltrumite Empire that he and his father carried the bloodline of Argol, the last Viltrumite leader. If he could do that, they would be able to claim leadership of the Empire and reshape its brutal legacy. But to get there, Mark needed them to test his or Omniman's blood. Eve nudged him gently. "You okay?" Mark blinked, realizing he had been lost in thought. "Yeah, just thinking." She gave him a small, understanding smile, and they turned their attention back to the ceremony. Later that evening, Mark sat in his room, still mulling over the funeral and his plans, when his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number, but when he answered, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Hey, Mark. It's Amber. William gave me your number." Hey," Mark replied, surprised. "What's up?" Amber's tone was casual but playful. "I was thinking, maybe you'd want to hang out? Just the two of us." Mark hesitated. "She's nice, but..." He thought about the vast difference in their lifespans, the inevitability of loss. "Amber, I don't think..." "Oh, come on," she interrupted. "You helped me deal with Todd. The least I can do is say thank you." Mark sighed, eventually giving in. "All right. Where should I meet you?" Amber gave him her address, and soon Mark was flying over the city. When he arrived at her house, he landed discreetly and waited a while before knocking on her door. Amber answered wearing a red silk robe, her confident smirk catching him off guard. "Amber, what are you do?" She cut him off, stepping closer. "Mark Grayson, you've been playing hard to get. I just wanted to thank my hero, and I figured I'd do it properly." Despite his initial reluctance, Mark found himself swept up in the moment. Amber's forwardness was something he wasn't used to, but it was clear she wasn't going to take no for an answer. While he had started dating in his new life, he had not experienced losing his virginity in either lifetime. Mark and Amber both fell on the bed feeling exhausted and euphoric. They had just shared an intimate moment, but afterward, Mark felt compelled to tell her the truth. He didn't want to do so right after having sex, but he knew the sooner, the better she would be able to move on, even if that meant she hated him. "Amber," he began after a couple of minutes, "we can't be together." She frowned, wrapping herself in the robe. "Why not?" Mark sat up, his tone serious. "I'm not like other guys. I'm an alien. I'll live for centuries. I don't want to hurt you by building something that can't last." Amber's eyes widened. "Wait, what do you mean?" Mark sighed. "Do you know that new hero, Invincible? That's me. I don't really care about my secret identity, it's just there for privacy, but I want to tell you because I'm not only a hero but also a Viltrumite alien, so it can get dangerous for you, and I live a very long lifespan." Amber's eyes widened, but she took the revelation surprisingly well. "Your kind lives for centuries." Mark nodded. "Yeah, we do. While you would grow old after half a century, I will stay how I look now." Amber looked conflicted but eventually smiled sadly. "I get it. But, can we still be friends?" "Of course," Mark said, relieved. She leaned closer, brushing her lips against his. "Even if I can't have forever with you, I want to enjoy moments like this." Mark sighed, conflicted, but kissed her again, giving in to the fleeting comfort. Mark stepped out of Amber's house, the midday sun shining brightly. His thoughts were still swirling from his conversation with Amber, her openness and acceptance lingering in his mind. He looked up, preparing to launch himself into the air when a sudden shimmer of energy materialized in front of him. Cecil Stedman stood there, arms crossed, his trademark composed yet authoritative demeanor in full effect. "Mark," Cecil said, his tone brisk. "I need your help." Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You always seem to have great timing, Cecil." Cecil didn't flinch. "The new Guardians of the Globe aren't ready for action yet, and we've got a situation. I need you to step in." Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I'm not really interested in working under the government." Cecil cut him off, his gaze firm. This isn't about us. It's about the people you can save. Innocent civilians. You have the power to help them. Mark paused, considering Cecil's words. He didn't trust the GDA fully, but the thought of people getting hurt when he could prevent it weighed on him. Finally, he nodded. All right. What's the situation? Cecil handed him a small earbud. Dr. Seismic is attacking Mount Rushmore. Don't ask me why, he's unhinged, as usual. I've already dispatched Eve to meet you there. You'll work together to stop him. Mark took the earbud, slipping it in. Got it. Without another word, Mark leaped into the sky, his casual clothes morphing seamlessly into his invincible suit mid-flight. He adjusted his trajectory, flying toward Mount Rushmore with the wind rushing past him. Midway through the flight, Mark spotted a familiar pink streak in the sky. He matched its speed, catching up to Adam Eve, who looked unusually tense as she flew ahead of him. Hey, Eve, Mark called out, his voice light. Ready to save Mount Rushmore? Eve glanced at him, her face tight with frustration. Yeah. Let's just get this over with. Mark frowned, noticing her mood. He had a pretty good idea of what was bothering her but decided not to push. All right, but if you need to talk, I'm fine, Eve snapped, cutting him off. Her tone softened slightly when she added, thanks, though. Mark nodded, respecting her space as they continued toward the monument. When they arrived at Mount Rushmore, chaos greeted them. Civilians were screaming and scrambling to get away as massive boulders were hurled down the mountain. Dr. Seismic stood atop a ledge, wearing his signature sonic gauntlets, which vibrated with destructive energy. His loud, theatrical voice boomed across the area. These faces on this mountain are a symbol of oppression. Seismic shouted, firing his gauntlets to dislodge another chunk of rock. I'm here to bring them down and free the people from this facade of... Mark rolled his eyes, tuning out the monologue. Why do villains always have to give a speech? He muttered. Mark, Eve said, her tone sharp. I'll handle the civilians. You focus on him. Got it, Mark replied, already moving. Eve flew down toward the fleeing crowds, creating pink energy barriers to deflect falling debris and guiding people to safety. Meanwhile, Mark locked eyes on Seismic and shot forward, moving faster than the human eye could follow. In an instant, Mark was in front of Seismic. His suit morphed around Seismic's gauntlets, the advanced fabric breaking down the weapons and absorbing their materials into its arsenal. Seismic barely had time to register what was happening before Mark tapped the side of his neck, knocking him out cold. He's all yours, Mark said, pressing his earbud. Mark caught Seismic's unconscious body before it hit the ground and flew down to where a portal shimmered into existence, GDA agents stepping through. The agents nodded, pulling the unconscious villain through the portal as it vanished. Mark turned back to Eve, who had finished evacuating the civilians and now hovered nearby. That was fast, she said, a note of admiration in her voice. You didn't even let him finish his speech. Mark smirked. Heroes with superspeed really shouldn't have trouble dealing with monologuing villains. It's just common sense. Eve chuckled lightly but still looked distracted. Mark studied her for a moment before speaking. Hey, you okay? Eve hesitated, then shook her head. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar, Mark said gently. Come on, let's go somewhere we can talk. Eve looked at him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. All right. Mark led the way, flying back toward his house, the weight of Eve's unspoken sadness hanging between them. When they arrived at the Grayson home, Mark led Eve to his room through the window. She sat on his bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stared at the floor. Rex cheated on me, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. With duplicate. Mark's heart sank, even though he'd known this was coming. Eve, I'm sorry. That's awful. Eve wiped her eyes, trying to stay composed. I thought he cared about me. But I guess I just didn't matter enough to him. Mark sat beside her, his voice gentle but firm. What Rex did wasn't about you, Eve. It was about him. He made a choice, and it was the wrong one. You deserve so much better. Eve looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion and tears. You really think so? Mark nodded. Absolutely. And maybe this is a chance for you to figure out what you want, without Rex holding you back. Eve's gaze softened, and for a moment, she leaned closer, her face inches from his. But before anything could happen, the door opened, and Debbie walked in. "Mark Grayson," she exclaimed, her voice full of maternal authority. Mark blurred into action, using his superspeed to put some distance between himself and Eve, making it look like they'd just been sitting and talking. Debbie crossed her arms, giving Mark a pointed look. "You're too young to be bringing girls home unsupervised." Mark winced. "Mom, I was just consoling a friend. She's having a rough night. Plus, I'm practically an adult." Debbie's expression softened slightly, though she still gave Mark a suspicious look. "Fine. Eve, would you like to stay for dinner?" Eve started to decline, but Mark cut in. "She'd love to." The Grayson family sat around the dinner table, the mood light. Debbie passed plates of food while Nolan and Mark engaged in small talk. Eve stayed quiet, her mind preoccupied until she turned to Mark. "So," she asked, "is your dad Omni-Man?" The question hung in the air, and Mark exchanged a glance with Nolan before nodding. "Yeah, that's him." Eve's eyes widened in awe. "Wow, that's a lot to live up to." Mark smirked faintly. "Tell me about it." The conversation continued, and for a moment, everything felt normal, just a family dinner with friends. But Mark knew that this fragile peace wouldn't last forever. The Viltrumite Empire loomed on the horizon, and it was going to experience massive change. Meanwhile, in space, Alan had just finished his report to the Coalition Council, informing them about a half-Viltrumite who not only pledged to aid their cause but also possessed strength surpassing that of his Viltrumite father, the very same individual Alan had previously unknowingly been testing as Earth's champion. When Alan finished reporting, he was called to a private meeting room with Thetis, the Coalition leader. Thetis leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on Alan. "Excellent work, Alan," he said, his deep voice carrying a note of approval. "Finding a Viltrumite willing to aid our cause is no small feat, let alone one with the strength to already rival his father." Alan grinned, scratching the back of his head. "Thank you, sir. Honestly, it felt like I just got lucky." Thetis chuckled softly, then leaned forward. "Luck or not, you've accomplished something significant. But tell me, have you noticed any changes in yourself recently?" Alan blinked, confused by the question. "Changes? What do you mean?" Thetis gestured toward him. "Your build, your musculature. You've grown stronger." Alan looked down at himself, taking in his slightly bulkier frame. His muscles were more defined, his body exuding a strength he hadn't noticed before. Flexing his arm experimentally, he marveled at the change. "Ha! I didn't even realize." Thetis's expression grew thoughtful. "When the Unopans genetically engineered you, they designed your body to adapt and grow stronger after recovering from near-death experiences. Have you had any such experiences recently?" Alan's brows furrowed as he thought back to his last encounter with Mark, Invincible. The memory of that single devastating punch came rushing back. "Actually, yeah. During my last visit to Earth, Invincible hit me with a punch that almost killed me." Thetis's eyes widened in shock. "A single punch?" Alan nodded, still a little awestruck at the memory. "Yeah. I've never felt anything like it. I thought I was done for." For a moment, Thetis was silent, his expression shifting from surprise to excitement. If that's the kind of power Invincible already wields, then he could be the key to turning the tide against the Viltrumites. He smiled, his voice filled with hope. "I'm glad you left him a communicator. We'll need to reach out to him soon." Alan nodded in agreement. He's definitely someone worth having on our side. Later that evening, Alan was seated across from his girlfriend, Telia, in a cozy restaurant on a Coalition station. The atmosphere was warm and lively, filled with a hum of quiet conversation and the clinking of utensils. Telia huffed at him, resting her chin on her hand. "You've been gone too long. Can't you at least try to visit more?" Alan laughed softly, leaning back in his chair. "I guess I have been working a lot. I could take the time to." Before Alan could finish, a deafening explosion ripped through the wall of the restaurant. Debris scattered as the airlock seals activated, shielding the station from depressurization. Screams erupted as patrons ducked for cover. Alan was dragged out of the space station by 3 Viltrumites who were hovering in space looking menacingly at him. The leader, a tall, scarred male with an aura of cold authority, floated forward. His eyes locked onto Alan, unyielding. "Alan the Anopan," he said, his voice like ice. "We've heard rumors about a hybrid Viltrumite on Earth. Give us information about him." Alan's jaw tightened, his stance unwavering. "I don't know what you're talking about." The leader smirked, his expression turning predatory. "Don't play dumb. You've been to Earth. We know you've met him. Now talk, or we'll make you talk." Alan grinned despite the tension. "Why don't you try?" Inside the restaurant, Alan's girlfriend watched in horror as the restaurant repaired the breach, the shimmering energy field re-establishing the barrier. She pressed her hands against the glass, her eyes wide as she saw Alan struggling against the attackers. Without warning, one of the Viltrumites shot forward, punching Alan further into the vacuum of space. One came from above, throwing a devastating punch that Alan barely managed to block. The impact sent him hurtling backward, but he recovered quickly, propelling himself toward the attacker with newfound strength. "Let's see how tough you really are." Alan growled, landing a punch that sent his opponent flying. The leader, however, was ready. He intercepted Alan mid-charge, slamming a fist into his abdomen with enough force to crack one of Alan's ribs. Alan gritted his teeth, refusing to give the leader the satisfaction of seeing him falter. He countered with a swift uppercut, the force of the blow causing the leader to lose his grip on Alan briefly. Alan spun to face his remaining attackers, his muscles burning with exertion. Despite his newfound strength, the 3 Viltrumites worked together like a well-oiled machine. Their movements were precise, their strikes relentless. Alan managed to incapacitate one of them, grabbing the Viltrumite by the leg and hurling him into an asteroid with a bone-crunching impact. But the effort left him vulnerable, and the leader capitalized on the opening, delivering a crushing blow to Alan's back. The 2 remaining Viltrumites circled Alan like vultures, their confidence growing as they sensed his exhaustion. Alan swung at the leader, but his punch was slower now, easier to dodge. The leader caught his arm, twisting it painfully before slamming Alan into the station's hull. Inside the restaurant, Alan's girlfriend cried out, her fists pounding against the glass. She watched helplessly as the Viltrumites brutalized him, her heart breaking with every blow. The leader leaned in close to Alan, his voice cold and mocking. "You're resilient, I'll give you that. But you're still just a bug to us." With one final, devastating punch, the leader sent Alan hurtling away from the station, his battered body spinning uncontrollably through space. The 2 Viltrumites hovered for a moment, their gazes following his trajectory. "We've sent our message," the leader said, his tone dismissive. "Let's go." The 2 Viltrumites turned, grabbed the incapacitated Viltrumite and sped off into the void, leaving Alan drifting and broken. The city was alive with a hum of activity, from bustling streets to the distant rumble of construction. Amidst the urban chaos, a streak of yellow and blue darted through the sky, closely followed by a pink glow. Mark, in his invincible suit, glanced over his shoulder at Eve, who was flying beside him with her characteristic grace. "Not bad for a morning, huh?" Mark said with a smirk, pointing to the unconscious villain they'd just left tied up for the authorities below. "3 arrests and a robbery foiled, and it's not even noon," Eve replied, matching his smirk. "We make a good team." Mark grinned. "You know, we should make this official. A dynamic duo. What do you think?" Eve raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Why not?" Mark shrugged, dodging a flock of birds as they soared over a park. "We work well together. Plus, I could use a cool partner." Eve laughed, her earlier irritation from personal issues momentarily forgotten. "All right, Invincible. You've got yourself a deal. Official superhero duo." "Nice," Mark said, punching the air triumphantly. Eve rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "You're such a dork." Despite his new partnership with Eve, Mark balanced his personal life with surprising ease. His Kryptonian speed and memory allowed him to breeze through schoolwork in record time, ensuring his grades stayed top-notch. Even with his growing responsibilities as a hero, he made time for Amber, though their interactions leaned more toward physical intimacy. Though, occasionally they would just hang out as friends, even including William at times. Between activities like bowling, boba runs, and their shared moments at her house, Mark felt like he was keeping everything together. It was lunchtime at school, and Mark sat across from William at their usual table. William was mid-rant about some new TV show when the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Okay, but seriously," William said, eyeing Mark's sandwich. "Do you ever get bored of normal food with all your super senses? Like, how does a PB&J even register?" Mark smirked. "I mean, I can taste every flavor in insane detail, so yeah, ordinary food tastes great. But I still have my preferences." William opened his mouth to ask more, but he was interrupted by Amber and Eve approaching their table. "Hey, Mark," came a voice from behind. Mark turned to see Amber, her confident smile lighting up her face. "Mind if I sit with you guys?" Amber asked, her tone casual but her eyes focused on Mark. Before he could reply, another voice chimed in. "Hey, Mark, is it okay if I join you?" Mark glanced to his other side, spotting Eve standing there, holding her tray. Her expression was calm, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity in her eyes as she noticed Amber standing there too. The two girls looked at each other, their polite smiles barely masking the questions swirling in their minds. Amber's gaze shifted to Eve's, assessing her, while Eve's eyes briefly flicked to Amber before settling back on Mark. "Sure, both of you can sit," Mark said, gesturing to the empty seats at the table. Amber and Eve sat down, flanking Mark on either side. The tension between them was subtle but noticeable. While Amber leaned in slightly toward Mark, her posture relaxed as if this was familiar territory. Eve's presence was more reserved yet attentive. Both seemed to radiate unspoken intent, their motivations clear to William but apparently lost on Mark. Before either could speak, William cut in. "Hey, Mark, want to hang out later? Maybe hit the arcade." Mark shook his head. "Can't. I have a meeting with the principal. I'm planning to take 2 weeks off for a trip." William frowned. 2 weeks? What kind of trip? Mark shrugged casually. "Just something I need to handle." Amber frowned slightly, her curiosity piqued. "You're being awfully vague." Eve nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, 2 weeks is a long time." Standing up and grabbing his tray, Mark began walking away but looked back. "Just flying to Mars," he said casually while leaving the cafeteria. The previous evening, Cecil had visited the Grayson household. Sitting at the dining table with Debbie, Nolan, and Mark, Cecil explained the mission. "We have a team of astronauts launching tomorrow," Cecil said. "They're headed to Mars, and we need someone to keep an eye on them." Quietly, Nolan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I have responsibilities here. I can't be off-planet for that long." Cecil's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't push. "Fair enough. Mark." Mark leaned forward. "Sure, why not?" Nolan gave him a skeptical look. "It's Mars. Do you even know how far that is?" Mark smirked, gazing upward as if looking through the ceiling. "I could probably get there in 30 minutes. Debbie frowned. "What are you looking at?" "The surface of Mars," Mark said nonchalantly. Debbie blinked. "How?" "Magic eyes," Mark replied, grinning. "X-ray vision for walls, supervision for distance, and heat vision for, well, heat." To demonstrate, he fired a small beam at Debbie's coffee mug, reheating it perfectly. Debbie stared, speechless and pleasantly surprised. Nolan's expression darkened, his thoughts clearly racing. Cecil raised an eyebrow, more thoughtful than surprised. "Magic," Nolan muttered, narrowing his eyes. "No Viltrumite has ever had magic. My son might become the most dangerous being in the history of the Viltrumites." Cecil's mind was equally active. If Omni-Man really did kill the Guardians, Mark might be the only one capable of stopping him. But would he choose Earth over his father? Mark leaned back, smirking at their stunned faces. "I'll handle Mars. Consider it done." The day of the astronauts' launch arrived. Mark watched from a distance as their rocket ascended into the atmosphere. Once it was out of sight, he leaped into the sky, donning his invincible suit mid-flight. His helmet crackled to life as Cecil's voice came through the comms. "Remember, stay hidden. The astronauts can't know you're there." "Got it," Mark replied. "I'll do a preliminary sweep of the planet first. I want to make sure there's no trouble waiting for them." Cecil hesitated. "Fine. Just keep us updated." Mark blasted off, the Earth shrinking behind him as he pushed his speed. In less than 5 minutes, he reached Mars, far surpassing his earlier estimate. He touched down gently on the planet's surface, the red sand swirling around his boots. Using his X-ray vision, Mark located a hidden hatch leading to the Martian kingdom. He pried it open and dropped into the tunnel below, greeted by the stale, metallic air of the underground city. Mark descended into the dimly lit tunnels of the Martian underground, his footsteps echoing softly against the metallic floor. The air was thick and stale, tinged with a metallic scent that reminded him of rusted iron. His X-ray vision scanned the walls as he walked, and his heightened senses picked up faint skittering sounds, sequids. A group of the parasitic creatures emerged from the shadows, their slimy tendrils writhing as they lunged at him. "Gross," Mark muttered. With a quick burst of heat vision, the sequids were vaporized, their remains sizzling into nothingness. Well, that's a good start. Moments later, Martian guards appeared, their tall, elongated forms clad in intricate armor that shimmered faintly under the dim red lights. They leveled their weapons at Mark. Raising his hands in a gesture of peace, Mark explained that he wanted an audience with their king. After a tense moment, they gestured for him to follow. The journey to the throne room was a winding path through expansive corridors and massive chambers filled with alien architecture. The deeper they went, the more Mark marveled at the advanced civilization hidden beneath the barren Martian surface. Finally, the throne room came into view. It was a grand chamber, its walls adorned with crystalline patterns that reflected the soft glow of red orbs suspended in the air. At the center of the room sat the Martian king on an obsidian throne. His imposing figure radiated authority, his piercing gaze fixed on Mark as he entered. "What business do you have here, Earthling?" the king demanded, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Mark stepped forward, his tone steady. "In 2 weeks, humans will land on the surface of Mars. I'm here to make sure your people avoid them." The king's expression hardened. "That cannot be allowed. If the sequids bond with the humans, they will form a hive mind capable of destroying Mars and other planets." Mark folded his arms, meeting the king's gaze. "Then let me deal with the sequids. They can't attach to me due to my Viltrumite heritage, and I can wipe them out before the humans arrive." The king leaned back on his throne, his features unreadable as he considered Mark's proposal. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "If you can eliminate the sequids, the humans will have nothing to fear from us. But failure is not an option." Mark smirked. "Don't worry. I'm not planning on failing." Mark wasted no time. With his X-ray vision, he scanned the planet, locating clusters of sequids hidden in underground layers and deep crevices. His superspeed allowed him to traverse vast distances in mere moments, and his heat vision proved to be the perfect weapon against the parasitic creatures. In one cavern, a massive swarm of sequids writhed and pulsed, their collective movements creating an almost deafening chittering sound. Mark hovered above them, his heat vision glowing red as he unleashed a control beam that swept through the swarm, reducing them to ash. "Okay, that's one nest down," he muttered, dusting off his hands. "Only 1,000,000 more to go." He moved methodically, ensuring no sequid escaped his notice. His precise control over his powers allowed him to clear nests without causing collateral damage to the Martian environment. In one particularly large nest, he used his superspeed to create a vortex, drawing the sequids into a concentrated area before incinerating them in a single burst of heat vision. By the time he returned to the throne room, a single day had passed and every last sequid on Mars had been eradicated. The Martian king rose from his throne, his expression one of genuine gratitude. "You have done Mars a great service, Invincible. The humans may come without fear, and our people will remain safe. We are in your debt." Mark gave a small bow, smirking. "Just doing my job. Glad I could help." Back on the Martian surface, Mark spoke to Cecil. "Mission complete. I'll keep an eye on the astronauts for when they arrive." "Good work," Cecil replied. "Stay sharp." Mark glanced upward, his gaze settling on the sun. He set aside his helmet and oxygen tank. He knew he never needed them, as he could hold his breath for a very long time, use the yellow sun to fuel his cells instead of oxygen, and even use his magic to create a perpetual pocket of air around him. Mark then lifts off the planet and casts an invisibility spell that works by passing photons right through him unfazed, making him blind to satellites. Mark launched himself into space, his speed leaving a crimson streak behind. As he approached the sun, the intense heat and energy enveloped him, his cells absorbing every ounce of power. He hovered near the surface, feeling a euphoria unlike anything he'd experienced before. "This is incredible," he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. With cautious precision, he descended into the sun's outer layers, the searing energy coursing through him. He didn't want to overload his cells like All-Star Superman did in the movie. However, he looked at himself and saw his Kryptonian cells made up of his Viltrumite smart atoms adapting to the extreme conditions and enhancing his durability. His cells were now durable enough that they couldn't overload from taking in too much sunlight. Feeling that he would be fine, Mark dives deeper into the sun's core. "I can feel it, my strength growing," Mark thought, his body vibrating with newfound power. Using Torquasm Bow, he entered a meditative state. His mind hovered in a half-awake, half-asleep state, allowing him to monitor the astronaut's progress while simultaneously focusing on mastering his heightened abilities. After days in the sun's core, Mark sensed the astronauts nearing Mars. With a burst of speed, he left the sun, the distance from its core to Mars covered in less than a second. Moving even faster than he had been when coming to Mars from Earth. He landed softly beside his helmet and oxygen tank, donning them once more as if nothing had happened. "The astronauts are safe," he reported to Cecil. "Mission accomplished." "Good work, Mark," Cecil replied. "Come home." As Mark began his return journey to Earth, he couldn't resist testing his newfound abilities. Flying at speeds faster than ever, he zipped through asteroid fields and performed high-speed maneuvers with ease. Each movement felt effortless, his body fully attuned to its enhanced capabilities. Meanwhile, aboard a Viltrumite warship speeding toward Earth, the three Viltrumites who had attacked Alan sat in tense discussion. Their leader leaned forward, his tone firm. "The Coalition's intel confirms it. The Viltrumite agent who was assigned to Earth procreated and has a son who isn't loyal to our empire. However, it's unclear if the agent is also a traitor." "We'll crush him," one of his subordinates snarled, slamming a fist into the table. The leader smirked. "Just in case the agent is also a traitor, I've called for reinforcements." The ship's doors opened, revealing Anissa, a Viltrumite with a towering air of authority. She stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto the others. "You called for help?" she asked, her tone dripping with confidence. The Grayson household was quiet when Mark landed outside after his mission on Mars. Opening the front door, he called out, "I'm home," but immediately regretted it. The faint sound of rustling fabric and hurried movements came from the living room. His father, Nolan, was attempting to look casual but failing miserably. His hair was disheveled, and his shirt was hastily buttoned. His mother, Debbie, had her face flushed and her shirt on backward. Mark stopped mid-step, his expression shifting to disgust. "Gross," he muttered, shaking his head and heading up to his room. Behind him, Debbie's eyes widened in horror as she whispered to Nolan, "Do you think he saw us with his X-ray vision?" From upstairs, Mark's voice came through loud and clear. "He's got your shirt on backward." Debbie groaned, covering her face with her hands as Nolan looked sheepish. "Well," Nolan said, "he's not wrong." The next morning, Mark stood in his room, focusing intently as he extended his hands outward. A faint shimmer of light appeared in the air before him, swirling and twisting until it formed a portal glowing with golden energy. Mark stepped through, entering the Flaxen dimension of solitude. The dimension, once the home of the Flaxens, was now his personal sanctuary. Advanced technology, both salvaged and modified, filled the space. A glowing control console stood at the center of the room, surrounded by various projects in progress. One of these was a restoration chamber, a sleek device Mark had designed to reverse the effects of aging. He'd been experimenting with Monster Girl's blood, samples taken in both her human and monster forms, and exposing them to the dimension's time dilation to better understand her curse. "This should revert her to her proper age," Mark muttered as he adjusted the chamber settings. "It's not a permanent fix, but it'll buy her more time." Satisfied, he turned his attention to other projects. One was a device designed to halt aging altogether. Mark envisioned giving it to his human loved ones so they could stay together for millennia. Nearby, a prototype for a weaker version of his fluid fabric suit lay on another table. Mark planned to patent and sell it to the public, using the profits to establish his own business empire. Next to it was a transdimensional locator, which he was developing to detect interdimensional portals. He had one specific target in mind, Angstrom Levy. Mark's smirk widened as he imagined the possibilities of accessing Levy's knowledge of the multiverse. All coming together, he said to himself before stepping back through the portal. Back at home, Debbie sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop. Damien Darkblood's accusations lingered in her mind, creating a storm of doubt. Did Nolan really kill the Guardians? She wondered, tapping her fingers on the table. Her thoughts were interrupted by Mark, who descended the stairs with his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, noticing her distracted expression. Debbie forced a smile, shaking her head. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Mark raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. His eyes drifted to the pile of papers on the table. "Is that mine?" he asked. Debbie nodded. 2 weeks' worth of homework. I hope you didn't forget. Mark chuckled, setting his backpack down. I got it. In a blur of motion, he zipped through the worksheets, his pen flying across the pages. Within seconds, the stack was complete, and he stuffed it into his bag. Debbie blinked as Mark headed for the door. Sometimes I wish I had Viltrumite speed, she muttered, turning back to her laptop. At his locker, Mark swapped out his books when two familiar voices called out at the same time. Hey, Mark. Amber's cheerful tone came from the right. Hey, Mark, Eve said from the left, her voice calm but curious. Mark turned to see both girls standing there. Amber's bright smile faltered slightly as she noticed Eve, and Eve's composed demeanor tightened when her gaze shifted to Amber. The two exchanged polite but wary nods before focusing on Mark. The two girls exchanged polite but wary nods before looking back at Mark. How was your trip? They asked in unison, then frowned at each other. Mark grinned. It was cool. Flying in space was exciting, a real out-of-world experience. Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out 2 small rocks, each wrapped in a clear pouch. I got these from Mars. One for each of you, and one for William. Amber and Eve stared at the rocks in stunned silence as Mark closed his locker. See you in class, he said, walking off with a small smirk. As he left, he heard their voices behind him. You knew, they exclaimed simultaneously, pointing at each other. Mark suppressed a laugh, mentally noting, I love dropping bombs on people. After school, Mark arrived at the Guardian's base. Monster Girl, Amanda, was waiting for him in one of the lounges. After talking to each other about how Mark would help her with her curse, they had decided to share their identities. She glanced up as he entered, a mix of curiosity and hope in her expression. Hey, Mark, she said. You said you had something to show me? Mark nodded, gesturing for her to follow. Yeah, I've been working on a way to help with your situation. I can't fix it completely yet, but I can at least revert you to your original age. Amanda's eyes widened. Seriously? You can do that? Mark grinned. Seriously? Mark gestured for her to follow. He didn't want to display his portal magic around Robot or in the Guardian's base, so he scooped her up in his arms and took off into the sky. Amanda yelped in surprise but quickly adjusted, clutching his shoulders as he flew. Mark soared over the ocean, his bioelectric aura shielding Amanda from the intense wind resistance. After a few moments, he opened a portal midair, slowing down into his lab in the Flaxen dimension. Amanda looked around, her jaw dropping. Where are we? My private lair, Mark said with a grin. Magic helped me make it. He led her to the restoration chamber, a sleek device glowing faintly with green energy. Amanda hesitated as she stepped inside, her expression nervous. This isn't going to, melt me, is it? Mark smirked. Relax. It'll hurt a little, but I've made it as painless as possible. The chamber will pump a nutrient-rich solution into your system to ensure your body grows without being deficient in the nutrients your body needs. Also, it will blast you with rays of temporal energy, reverting you back to your proper age." Amanda nodded, steeling herself as Mark closed the chamber's door. The machine hummed to life, bathing the interior in green light. Amanda's screams echoed briefly as her body rapidly aged back to its original state. When the chamber powered down, smoke hissed from its seams. Mark opened the door, his eyes widening as Amanda stepped out. She was now a fully grown 24-year-old, her once childish clothes straining against her curvy, adult frame. Amanda glanced down at herself, a mix of immense joy and embarrassment crossing her face. "I feel taller." Before either of them could say anything else, her shirt gave out, ripping down the middle. Mark blinked, his mouth slightly agape. "Damn." Mark's eyes lingered on Amanda's exposed chest longer than he intended. She quickly crossed her arms over herself, cheeks flushed, but her lips curled into a flirtatious smirk. "Well, did you like the show?" Amanda teased, her tone both embarrassed and daring. Mark chuckled awkwardly, turning his gaze away. "I, should have thought about your clothes. My bad." Amanda took a step closer, her playful smile softening into something more vulnerable. "It's okay," she murmured. "I haven't been in my adult body for so long. I almost forgot what it's like to feel like this." Her voice cracked, and before Mark could react, Amanda leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss caught him off guard, but he didn't pull away. When she stepped back, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "What was that for?" Mark asked gently. Amanda wiped at her face, sniffling. "I've missed this, being able to feel close to someone. Being intimate. I don't want to waste this chance, and you helped me, so I want the first person to be you." Afterward, Amanda lay beside Mark, a satisfied smile on her face. "I could get used to this," she said with a playful wink. "What do you think?" Mark smirked, sitting up and pulling a small case from his desk. "If we're doing this, you're going to need something better to wear. Here." Inside the case was a sleek, custom-fitted version of his weakened fluid fabric, tailored for her needs. "This suit is designed to adapt to your transformations," Mark explained. "It'll change shape and design based on what you need, and it's practically indestructible." Amanda sat up, taking the suit in her hands. "You made this for me?" she asked, her voice soft. "I had the idea in mind for someone with your abilities," Mark admitted. "But yeah, I thought you'd like it." Amanda leaned forward, pressing a lingering kiss to his lips. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered, her tone flirtatious again. "You keep this up, and I might never let you go." Mark laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, let's get back before the rest of the Guardians start getting suspicious and looking at me like I'm Diddy." Mark created a portal above the ocean, flying through it with Amanda in his arms. When they arrived at the Guardians' HQ, the team turned to greet them but froze upon seeing Amanda. Her now adult body, combined with her confident demeanor, left them stunned. Rex whistled, his eyes wide. "Monster girl. More like monster babe." Robot, however, analyzed the situation silently. His sensors picked up on the subtle changes in Amanda's posture, the faint marks on her skin, and the way she leaned slightly on Mark for support. He quickly deduced the truth: they had been intimate. Inwardly, Robot's human consciousness bristled. He had developed feelings for Amanda and had planned to use the Mahler twins to create a new body to win her affection. Mark's intervention had disrupted his plans and sparked a simmering resentment. Robot didn't say anything, but his mind raced. "I'll continue my plan for a new body. But I'll also prepare for contingencies, including Mark." What Robot didn't notice was that Mark was aware of his gaze on him. He inwardly thought, seems like I'll have to deal with him soon." Mark then shifted his focus back to the rest of the Guardians, who were asking him questions, and Monster Girl, who kept shifting his arm between her big boobs. A few days later, Mark flew over the city as Invincible, his mind preoccupied. With the patent for his fluid fabric finalized, he was strategizing ways to fund his business when something caught his attention: a message painted on a rooftop: "Invincible." Standing next to it was Titan. Mark floated down to the rooftop where Titan waited, his incomplete name painted in large, bold letters across the surface. The sight stirred a faint memory from his past life: Titan's betrayal from the comics. As Mark landed, he took a moment to assess the situation. Titan stood with his arms crossed, looking determined. "You went through a lot of trouble to get my attention," Mark said, his arms folded as he hovered a few inches off the ground. "Aren't you that criminal I took down a while ago? What do you want?" Titan took a step forward, his voice firm but edged with frustration. "I need your help. Machine Head's ruining my neighborhood, our neighborhood. He's squeezing the life out of it, driving people into the ground just to line his pockets." Mark questioned, keeping his tone neutral. "You need my help to take him down?" Titan exhaled heavily. "Yeah, Machine Head's untouchable. He's got money, connections, and goons who'll do anything for him. People are suffering, and I can't do this alone." "All right," Mark said. "Let's take him down. Lead the way." Titan looked surprised momentarily, expecting Mark to be one of those snobbish superheroes who focused on the big picture, before nodding. "Thanks, Invincible. You won't regret this." "Oh, I know," Mark said, cryptically. Mark then grabbed Titan under his arms and had him lead him to Machine Head's building. The pair arrived at Machine Head's opulent skyscraper, its reflective glass shimmering under the city's lights. Titan led Mark to the top floor, the elevator ride filled with a tense silence. Mark could feel the weight of Titan's gaze on him, but he kept his thoughts to himself. When the elevator doors slid open, they were met with a room of sleek furniture, gold accents, and Machine Head's mechanical voice cutting through the air. Well. Look who's come to visit," Machine Head drawled, his voice dripping with smugness. He sat behind an extravagant desk, flanked by a lineup of his best enforcers: Tether Tyrant, Furnace, Magmaniac, and Kursk. "You must be Invincible," Machine Head said, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Big fan of your work. Too bad you won't be around long enough to enjoy the perks of hero life." Mark rolled his eyes. "Let me guess, you're going to send these guys at me while you sit back and watch?" Machine Head's grin widened. "You catch on quick." Tether Tyrant's tentacle-like weapons shot out first, aiming to ensnare Mark. Mark caught them midair, his grip unyielding. With a flick of his wrist, he yanked Tether Tyrant forward, slamming him into Furnace, who was charging up a blast of molten energy. Before Furnace could recover, Mark unleashed his freeze breath, a beam of searing cold that started freezing Furnace's suit and Furnace, leaving a frozen block of rock. Magmaniac and Kursk moved in next, attacking in tandem. Magmaniac hurled molten projectiles while Kursk fired bolts of electricity. Mark dodged effortlessly, his speed allowing him to weave through the attacks with minimal effort. "You're going to have to try harder than that," Mark said, smirking. He moved in a blur, appearing behind Kursk and knocking him unconscious with a single strike. Before Magmaniac could react, Mark's freeze breath blasted him with a freezing gust, encasing his molten form in solid rock just like Furnace. Tether Tyrant tried to regroup, his tentacles flailing wildly, but Mark's tactile telekinesis took hold. The tentacles froze in midair and began wrapping around each other until they were in a jumbled knot. "Done already?" Mark asked, tossing the crumpled tentacles aside and knocking Tyrant out with a flick to the forehead. "Pathetic." Machine Head's smug demeanor faltered as Mark stepped forward. But a deep, guttural growl filled the room before Mark could reach him. From the shadows emerged Battle Beast, his towering frame exuding menace and confidence. The warrior's golden eyes locked onto Mark, and a grin spread across his face. "You," Battle Beast growled, pointing his massive clawed finger at Mark. "I can feel your strength. You might be the challenge I've been seeking." Mark tilted his head, unimpressed. "You've got a funny way of asking for a fight." Battle Beast didn't respond with words. Instead, he lunged forward, his mace swinging with the force of a wrecking ball. Mark sidestepped the attack with ease, the heavy weapon smashing into the ground and sending debris flying. "That's some swing you've got there," Mark quipped, watching Battle Beast recover. "But you're going to have to do better than that." Battle Beast roared, charging at Mark with a relentless series of attacks. His mace struck out in wide arcs, each blow powerful enough to obliterate walls, but Mark's speed allowed him to evade with almost casual ease. The room shook from the force of Battle Beast's strikes, cracks spreading across the walls and floor. "Stop dodging!" Battle Beast bellowed, his frustration mounting. "Fight me seriously, or are you just a coward?" Mark's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. "You want me to take this seriously? Fine." With a burst of speed, Mark closed the distance between them. Battle Beast's instincts kicked in, and he crossed his massive arms over his chest in an attempt to block Mark's incoming punch. Mark's fist collided with Battle Beast's defense in a thunderous impact. The force of the blow shattered both of the warrior's forearms, the bones snapping audibly as he was sent hurtling across the room. He crashed into the far wall, leaving a crater in the metal surface before crumpling to the ground. Battle Beast gritted his teeth, his breathing ragged from having his ribs piercing his lungs. His arms hung limply at his sides, mangled from the devastating strike. Despite his injuries, his eyes still burned with defiance as he pushed himself to his knees. "Kill me," he rasped, blood dripping from his mouth. "Let me die in battle, as a warrior should." Mark approached, his expression calm but resolute. "Why die now when there are bigger battles ahead? There are beings, maybe not in this universe, but others, that could provide you with a better, more enjoyable fight than even I could." Battle Beast's ears twitched, his pain momentarily forgotten as curiosity replaced his battle lust. "Others? What do you mean?" "I'm building something bigger than this world," Mark explained. "An empire that spans dimensions. You could be part of it. Fight the strongest warriors across the multiverse, push yourself to your limits, and achieve true glory." Battle Beast studied Mark carefully, his breathing heavy but his spirit unbroken. "You're either a fool or a visionary, Invincible. Either way, I'm intrigued." Mark crouched down, his hands glowing faintly with magic. "Good. But first, let me fix those injuries." Battle Beast growled in protest as Mark used his magic to accelerate the warrior's healing. Within moments, his body was restored, the pain replaced by an unfamiliar warmth. Battle Beast started flexing his newly healed arms. "Perhaps following you will lead me to the challenges I crave." He reached into a compartment on his belt and pulled out a small device. "This opens a portal to me. Call when you're ready." Mark took the device, smirking. "You won't regret this." Battle Beast chuckled darkly. "We'll see about that." With that, he activated the portal and stepped through, disappearing into the unknown. Mark turned his attention to Machine Head and Isotope, who were frozen in shock. Before he could react, Mark moved with blinding speed, delivering a precise chop to the side of Isotope's neck. The teleporter collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Machine Head's voice stuttered as he backed away. Wait. We can talk about this, right? No need to get violent." Mark ignored him, stepping forward with purpose, placing a firm hand on Machine Head's metallic skull. In his past life, he had read on forums that Superboy could use his tactile telekinesis in a way that would grant him control of electrical signals, computers, and different forms of tech. He didn't think the Codex would be able to grant him such power since it was just an application of his tactile telekinesis instead of an ability that Superboy naturally possessed. With his hand on Machine Head's skull, Mark activated a combination of his tactile telekinesis, Kryptonian intellect, and lightning magic. Using this combination of abilities, Mark essentially gave himself a new ability, tactile technopathy. In moments, he hacked into Machine Head systems, connecting him to the internet and rerouting control of his entire criminal network to himself. His brain was capable of reading, memorizing, and sorting out all of the data he collected from Machine Head to his bank accounts, different passwords, etc. Mark pulled his hand back and tapped the side of Machine Head's temple, ejecting a computer chip that had his programming. He still had use for Machine Head and even planned on studying how he was this sophisticated. Titan, standing off to the side, clenched his fists in anger. "What the hell are you doing? This wasn't the plan. You were just supposed to beat him and turn him in." Mark turned to him, his tone calm but firm. "You wanted Machine Head out of the picture. I'm taking care of it, personally." Titan stepped forward, his frustration evident. "This isn't justice. You're just replacing him with yourself." Mark's eyes glowed red faintly, his voice sharp. "And what was your plan, Titan? To take over yourself? Don't act like you're better than this. I could tell your true intentions and I don't agree with them. Go home to your family. Don't worry. I will make sure that things for the neighborhood will change, for the better." Titan hesitated, his fists trembling, before he finally turned and stormed out. Over the past week, Mark Grayson had started solidifying his influence in the city. Taking over Machine Head's business wasn't just about money or power, it was about building something better, something sustainable for the people who lived there. He used Machine Head's resources strategically, funding his fluid fabric clothing business while also making changes to the city itself. Mark didn't waste time. He began by dismantling the most harmful aspects of Machine Head's operations, starting with drug trafficking and illegal arms dealing. Flying over the city with crates of confiscated weapons, he dumped them in a deserted area before unleashing his heat vision, reducing them to nothing more than molten slag. The drugs, he handled differently. With a flick of his wrist and a spark of magic, he transmuted the dangerous substances into harmless plants, ensuring they could never harm anyone again. The newfound funds from Machine Head's empire didn't sit idle. Mark poured money into local food kitchens, orphanages, and even Amber's community center, which she had told him about. He knew that real change required uplifting communities, not just tearing down the bad. While he had no official clientele for his business yet, he had plans. His fluid fabric was a revolutionary product, customizable clothing with properties like minor regeneration, resistance to temperature changes, bulletproofing, and shock negation from high impacts. Before moving on to the public, his company would sell these to law enforcement, firefighters, doctors, and private security firms. Also, he wouldn't just sell this to the USA but worldwide so as not to give one country too much power. Mark wasn't worried about anyone reverse engineering the technology. The fabric's creation was a blend of flaxen technology and Kryptonian intellect, far beyond anything Earth could replicate. He also had plenty of hidden fail-safes that would always integrate into all his fluid fabric creations. To ensure quality control, he built specialized machines that would process raw fluid fabric into custom designs as per client specifications. He didn't want people around the raw fluid fabric in case of corporate spies or villains taking some and using it for potential evil, so he left all the work to robots and machines he built himself in his dimension of solitude. Though the GDA was an obvious potential customer, Mark decided to shelve the idea for now. Let them keep spying on me, he thought. They're not getting my tech unless I decide they're ready for it. Despite his growing responsibilities, Mark made time for his personal life. He fought crime with Eve, their teamwork improving with each outing. Their playful banter on patrols often ended with them laughing as they cleaned up after yet another supervillain. He hung out with his friends, William and Amber, too. With Amber, their time together was mostly intimate, punctuated by casual outings. Though Mark enjoyed her company, he couldn't shake the looming thought that he will eventually need to discuss their relationship. But, honestly, he was scared not to mention the fact that he also needed to talk to Eve about the growing sexual tension between them. Mark had noticed that oftentimes he would find Eve and Amber talking together as if they had become best friends. At times, he would walk up to them and their conversation would die down in front of him, with Eve often taking quick glances at him. He knew he could eavesdrop with his super hearing, but he wanted to give people their privacy, so he often turned down his super hearing. Even on their patrols, Eve would make explicit comments or find reasons to get close or touch him, all of which he didn't mind. One evening, Mark decided to visit Amanda, aka Monster Girl, at her home. She had been celebrating her return to adulthood and invited Mark over for drinks. Though he technically wasn't old enough to drink by Earth standards, he was by Flaxen standards, but Mark shrugged it off. "Alcohol doesn't affect me anyway," he told her with a small smile, his physiology immune to poisons and toxins. Amanda noticed his somber tone. "I guess being an alien means you can't drink, huh?" Mark nodded slightly. This was one of the things he imagined while stuck in the hospital during his past life. Going out with friends, having a good time while drinking. Before he could respond, Amanda climbed onto his lap, her face inches from his. "Well, if you can't enjoy a drink, maybe you can enjoy something else." She kissed him, and one thing led to another. After spending time with Amanda, Mark returned home. Debbie and Nolan were lounging on the couch in the living room. Using his X-ray vision, Mark noted the GDA agent stationed in the house across the street. Their surveillance annoyed him, but he let it slide as long as they didn't bug his room. "How was your day, sweetie?" Debbie asked as Mark grabbed food from the fridge. "It's been fine," he replied casually. "Just dealing with my new multi-million-dollar company." The silence that followed was palpable. Nolan and Debbie exchanged shocked glances before turning back to Mark. "What do you mean, multi-million-dollar company?" Debbie asked, her voice laced with confusion. Mark chuckled. pulling out a plate of leftovers. "Oh, yeah. So, there was this villain I arrested a while ago who wanted my help to take down his boss. The guy was rich and running illegal operations, so after I stopped him, I took control of his assets and handed him off to the GDA. I've been using the money to fund a textile business and improve the city." Debbie blinked, trying to process what she'd just heard. Eventually, she walked over and kissed Mark on the cheek. "Good job, honey. But you'd better not be full of empty promises like other rich business owners. And you still have to finish high school and college." Mark scratched the back of his head. "Do I really need college, though? I mean, I've got a long-term job now," he thought. Debbie crossed her arms and squinted her eyes at him. "College isn't just about the degree. It's about the experiences you'll miss if you don't go," she said as if she had read his thoughts. Mark looked as if he was caught red-handed. "Sure, Mom," he sheepishly replied. Nolan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "While it's good that you're thinking about the future, you shouldn't lose sight of your responsibilities. Running a company takes time you should be using to protect Earth." Mark leaned against the counter, his tone steady. "It won't take much time, Dad. I've got super speed and machines doing most of the work." Before Nolan could argue, Debbie stepped in. "Mark's been doing fine so far. His grades haven't slipped, and he's managing everything. But," she added, narrowing her eyes at Mark, "if you fall behind in school or struggle to balance everything, the company goes." "Fair enough," Mark replied, grabbing his plate. Nolan, however, wasn't done. "Do you even know how to run a business? While Viltrumites can read fast, it doesn't necessarily mean we can understand everything we are reading." Mark considered his options. He didn't want to have to keep lying about his Kryptonian powers, but he also didn't want to reveal reincarnation and his past life. Taking a breath, he waved his hand, casting a spell that sealed the room. The GDA agents across the street scrambled to recover the visual and audio feed. But Cecil, who had just teleported in to check on the situation, quickly deduced it was Mark's magic. "Let's wait it out," he told the agents. "Rushing in now would be a mistake." Inside the sealed room, Mark turned to his parents. "I didn't want to say this in front of Cecil before, but I actually picked up more than magic in the Flaxen dimension." Debbie and Nolan exchanged worried glances. Mark continued, "I found a device they're called the Codex, something that changed me. My body started absorbing solar radiation, giving me powers beyond my Viltrumite abilities. Boosting my strength and speed, enhanced intelligence, heat vision, and X-ray vision. I didn't know what it was while there since it turns out I can't absorb red sunlight. But, when I came back and especially when I went to space I could feel myself stronger and the powers coming in." "Are you even still a Viltrumite?" Nolan snapped, his voice low but brimming with tension. His eyes bored into Mark like he was trying to decipher what his son had become. "Do you even understand what this means? What you're saying?" Mark didn't flinch under his father's glare. He knew this reaction was coming. "Yes, I'm still a Viltrumite," Mark replied evenly. "That hasn't changed. My biology hasn't been replaced, just enhanced. Solar radiation supercharges my cells. I'm still me. I just have a few extra abilities now." Nolan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, his fists tightened at his sides. His mind raced. Viltrumites didn't need enhancements. They were already the strongest species in the universe. Yet here was his son, casually claiming he'd become something more. Can I make Mark loyal to the cause? Nolan wondered. Or has this enhancement pulled him further away from ever being a proper Viltrumite? Debbie, still processing, glanced nervously between the two of them. Should I schedule a doctor's appointment? Or, I don't know, a lab test or something? Mark chuckled, breaking the tension slightly. No, Mom. I'm fine. There are no side effects. Honestly, I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been. Debbie narrowed her eyes at him, skeptical. You're sure? Mark nodded. Positive. If anything, I feel stronger every day. And trust me, I've had plenty of time to check myself out. Besides, this makes me stronger. And you of all people should know strength is what matters, he said, looking at his dad. The words hit Nolan hard, and for a moment, his composure cracked. He quickly masked it with a neutral expression, but internally, he was wrestling with a storm of conflicting, potentially treasonous thoughts. His son was already powerful, but now, with these enhancements? He didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. Could Mark be strong enough to face Thrag one day? What if he refuses to help the Empire? Would anyone be able to beat him? Debbie's voice broke through the silence, soft and full of concern. Well, as long as you're okay, Mark, that's what matters. But please, if anything changes, you let me know, all right? Mark smiled at her. Of course, Mom. I promise. He grabbed his plate and started heading upstairs after taking down his barrier, leaving Debbie and Nolan alone in the living room. Nolan remained seated, his thoughts racing as he stared at the spot where Mark had been standing. Debbie glanced at him, her concern shifting from their son to her husband. You're quiet, she noted, cautiously. Nolan didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was low. Just thinking how much our boy has grown. Debbie hugged him. Yeah, eventually he's going to be leaving the nest and starting his own family. Nolan just hugged her back, taking in her warmth, and for the first time in a while, he stopped thinking about the mission and just focused on her presence. The sun hung low in the sky, casting warm hues across the city as Mark Grayson sat on his bed, scrolling through a web novel on his phone. After weeks of non-stop activity, building his company, fighting crime, and dealing with everything in between, he relished these moments of peace. For a few minutes, at least, he could pretend he wasn't burdened with the weight of superpowers, interdimensional threats, and a father who was hiding a dangerous secret. As he flipped the page of the story, a faint beep broke through the quiet. Mark's plain wristwatch, seemingly ordinary, began glowing red and vibrating. In an instant, it transformed into a sleek, high-tech device. The watch was linked to a microscopic drone he had discreetly placed on Robot during his visit to the Guardians HQ with Amanda. Cloaked with magic to evade detection, the drone had been lying dormant, waiting for any sign of contact with the Mauler twins. And now, the wait was over. Mark grinned to himself, watching the live feed as Robot showed the twins a vial of blood inside a dimly lit warehouse. Finally, he thought. Time to deal with this before it becomes a bigger issue. With a simple thought, Mark's casual clothes morphed into his invincible suit. Activating a cloaking spell, he leapt out of his bedroom window, flying quickly through the evening sky toward the Mauler twins' location. Hovering high above the warehouse, Mark used his X-ray vision to observe the scene inside. Robot stood with the Mauler twins near a large regeneration chamber and memory transfer table, a blueprint for his plans for his new body spread out on a nearby table. The twins bickered, as always, about who was the clone, while Robot attempted to maintain order. Mark smirked. If I'm being honest, I would have taken out the Mauler twins weeks ago so that Robot wouldn't have even gotten the idea to create a new body, he thought. But I need them alive for Angstrom Levy to show up. His eyes landed on the chamber, a critical piece of equipment the twins would need to create new bodies to transfer their memories into. I can't mess with the transfer device since Angstrom might need it, but I can sabotage the chamber. Using his heat vision, Mark targeted a pipe connected to the chamber. With precision, he fired, causing a controlled explosion that shook the warehouse. The blast knocked the Mauler twins and Robot off their feet, sending the vial of blood crashing to the floor. What the hell? One twin yelled, scrambling to his feet. This is your fault, clone, the other snapped. You're too incompetent to follow basic safety protocols. Enough. Robot's mechanical voice cut through their argument as he stood. His sensors scanned the area, but Mark's cloaking spell rendered him invisible. I'll return with another sample. Continue working on the device and do not fail me. If you do, I'll build a prison under the sea and lock you both inside. With that, Robot turned and left the warehouse, completely unaware of Mark's presence. Mark remained in the sky, watching Robot leave. That should buy me some time, he thought. But eventually, I'll still have to deal with Robot, hopefully after Levy comes. And while I'm at it, I should dig up the Immortal's body before the twins get any ideas. I can use his DNA for my own research into immortality and see if I can grant it. Returning home, Mark could feel the tension in the air. Debbie sat in the living room, flipping through a magazine with feigned nonchalance. Nolan was in his study, the faint sound of typing echoing down the hallway. Mark had noticed Debbie's growing suspicion of his father. She hid it well, but the subtle changes in her demeanor didn't escape his notice. Mark made his way to Nolan's study, his expression calm. Knocking lightly, he stepped inside, finding his father seated at his desk, typing on his laptop. The sight was quite domestic. "What's wrong?" Nolan asked, looking up from his screen. Mark stared at him for a moment before responding. "I know the truth. We need to talk." Nolan's eyes narrowed. "What truth?" Mark's voice was steady, unwavering. "Suit up. Arctic. 1 minute." Without waiting for a response, he flew out of the window, the cold wind whipping against his face as he ascended. Behind him, he could hear the familiar rush of Nolan's flight as his father followed. The Arctic wasteland was silent. The only sounds were the faint whistle of wind and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Mark floated in place, arms crossed, as Nolan landed a few feet away. "You said you know the truth," Nolan began, his tone guarded. "So, let's hear it." Mark didn't mince words. "I know about the Viltrum Empire. The coalition of planets told me everything." Nolan's expression darkened. "The coalition? They're nothing but roadblocks, pests that hinder the progress Viltrum brings to the universe. They don't understand what we're doing." "And what are you doing, exactly?" Mark asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Nolan straightened, his tone shifting to one of conviction. "We conquer planets, yes. But we bring order. Stability. We help weaker civilizations reach their full potential. That's what Viltrum is about, progress." Mark nodded slowly. "If that's true, then yeah, the coalition is a roadblock. I get it." Nolan's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You agree?" "For the most part," Mark continued, his tone neutral. "But your methods are flawed. Brutality and subjugation don't inspire progress, they create enemies. Enemies who will stop at nothing to destroy us." The brief glimmer of hope in Nolan's eyes faded, replaced by a simmering anger. "So you're against me," he said, his voice low. "I'm not against you, Dad," Mark said. "I'm against the way the Empire operates. We don't need to conquer Earth or any other planet. We should be forming alliances, sharing technology, and working together to build a better future. That's how we ensure Viltrum's survival." Nolan's fists clenched. "You're naive. You don't understand what's at stake." "Then make me understand," Mark challenged. Nolan's response was a powerful blow aimed at Mark's jaw. Mark blocked it effortlessly, his expression unchanging. "I was hoping we could just talk this out without the fighting, but if this is how you want to do it." Floating in the Arctic's freezing air, Mark exhaled slowly, the condensation barely forming before the harsh winds carried it away. His father was still kneeling in the crater below, panting, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. The snow beneath them had long since been stained red, the battle so far one-sided, but still, Nolan's glare remained defiant. Mark wasn't thinking about his father in that moment, though. The Flaxans. For the longest time, he had ignored the weight pressing down on his chest whenever he thought about what he had done. The genocide. The absolute decimation of an entire species. No, an entire civilization. At the time, he had justified it. It had been necessary. The Flaxans were a threat to Earth. If he had let them escape, they would have kept coming back, stronger each time, until they eventually overwhelmed the planet. Eliminating them at the source had been the simplest solution. But simplest didn't mean right. Now, standing over his beaten father, the weight of that choice bore down on him like never before. If he had been as strong as he is now, maybe he could have handled it differently. Maybe he could have led them to an uninhabited world. Given them an ultimatum. Negotiated a peace treaty. If he had spent even half the effort he was spending now trying to change the Viltrum Empire, he could have found another way. But I didn't. He had chosen the easier path. The violent path. And it worked. That was the worst part. Destroying their entire civilization had been the most efficient way to solve the problem. The thought of that made his stomach churn, because deep down, he knew that in his weakest moments, when he was cornered with no other options, he might do it again. The Mark from Invincible, the one he had read about in comics in his past life, had taken the Viltrum Empire and transformed it into something better. He had turned conquerors into allies. He had led them into a new era. Could he do the same? Could he lead his empire down a better path? Or was he destined to take the easiest road, even when it was paved in blood? He shook the thoughts away. He didn't have time to linger on the past. Right now, he had to deal with the present. He had to deal with his father. Nolan wiped the blood from his lips, his healing already working overtime. He took slow, measured breaths, gauging Mark carefully now. The arrogance he once had, the belief that he was unrivaled on this planet, was gone. In its place was something he hadn't felt in a while. Caution. Wariness. Fear. For the first time in a while, Nolan knew he had lost. But there was something deeper than pain in Nolan's expression. Confusion. Conflict. Doubt. Mark had to press that doubt. Before Nolan convinced himself otherwise. Nolan's nostrils flared. He shot forward, moving in less than a blink, his fist swinging like a meteor toward Mark's face. Mark caught his father's entire forearm with one hand. Nolan's eyes widened in shock. Mark didn't hesitate. He drove his knee straight into his father's ribs. A sickening crack echoed through the air as Nolan's bones snapped. He staggered back, choking on his own blood, his breath coming in short, gasping pants. Mark didn't let up. Before Nolan could recover, Mark slammed a hammer fist into his chest, sending him cratering into the frozen ground. But Nolan flew back to Mark, continuing to throw punches. It was not a contest. You think you're better than thousands of years of Viltrumite history? Nolan growled, his voice filled with frustration. No, Mark replied. But, I think the future of Viltrumites could be better. As they fought, Mark continued to make his case. Every planet Viltrum conquers is another potential enemy. Do you really think the Viltrumites as a species can survive if we keep making the universe hate us? Nolan's strikes grew more desperate, his anger boiling over. That's why we need Earth. They're the most compatible species for Viltrumite DNA. We can rebuild our numbers here. Mark sidestepped Nolan's punch, delivering a fist to his face and breaking Nolan's nose. And we don't have to conquer them to do that, Mark said, his voice steady. We can cooperate. Share resources. Build relationships. We don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Nolan fell to his knees, gasping for air. Mark floated down, standing over him. I know you love Mom, Mark said quietly. And I know you love me. So why are you so willing to throw it all away for a broken empire? Nolan looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and sorrow. You don't understand. I do, Mark interrupted. Then Mark pulled something out of his suit, a wrist device. This, Mark said, holding it up, is a prototype I've been working on. A device that halts aging. Nolan's eyes widened. You're lying, he whispered. Mark smirked. You always said humans are insignificant because they die too quickly. What if they didn't? What if Mom could live as long as we do? That hit its mark. Nolan staggered, the weight of the revelation crashing into him like a meteor. For decades, he had forced himself to see humans as temporary, a fleeting moment in the vast timeline of his life. But now, for the first time, there was a possibility that he wouldn't have to leave Debbie behind. That she could be with him forever. Mark saw the hesitation in his father's eyes. This is just the beginning, Mark said. If we work together, we don't have to conquer Earth. We can evolve Viltrum into something better. Nolan's hands trembled as he took the device. For the first time in his life, he felt something dangerous. Hope. And I have a plan. But you're not going to like it. Mark said. Nolan's eyes narrowed. What plan? Mark's smirk was faint but resolute. A coup d'etat. Arctic tundra, the aftermath of the battle. Nolan coughed, the coppery taste of blood filling his mouth as he knelt in the icy crater. The fight had been over before it had even truly begun. He had thrown every ounce of his strength into attacking Mark, but his son had countered him with calculated precision, never once breaking a sweat. Mark hovered above, arms crossed, his blue eyes glowing faintly against the white expanse of ice. The silence between them stretched, only the howling winds of the Arctic breaking it. Mark finally exhaled, shaking his head. I told you, Dad. You can't beat me. Nolan's pride bristled, but he wasn't a fool. He had spent centuries fighting, conquering, and ruling, but never had he faced an opponent who had so thoroughly outmatched him. And that opponent was his son. Still, he couldn't just accept this so easily. You're serious about this, coup? Nolan rasped, wincing as he slowly stood. He pressed a hand against his ribs, definitely broken. His Viltrumite healing would fix it in time, but for now, the pain was a bitter reminder of his defeat. Mark nodded, his voice firm. Yeah. It's the only way forward. Nolan let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. You realize the Empire follows the rule of the strongest, don't you? Even if we challenge Thrag, we don't know how strong he is. He's been the leader of the Viltrumites for thousands of years, and unlike me, he's never grown soft. Mark smirked. I think I'm strong enough already. I haven't even gone all out against you, and you're one of the strongest Viltrumites. That made Nolan pause. Even now, in his beaten state, he could tell Mark had been holding back. His attacks had been precise but not ruthless. He had controlled the fight from beginning to end without exerting himself. It was terrifying to consider how much stronger Mark could still become. How do you plan to do it? Nolan finally asked, crossing his arms despite the pain. Mark landed in front of him, his expression calm. I'm expecting a call from the coalition of planets soon. When they reach out, we'll use their support to issue a direct challenge to Thrag. He won't be able to refuse. Nolan raised a brow. You want to go through the coalition? You really think they'll back 2 Viltrumites? They'd rather see us dead. Mark shrugged. Not if I present myself as their best chance at ending the Viltrumite threat for good. A slow grin tugged at the corners of Nolan's lips. Clever. Mark gave him a knowing look. You raised me to be smart. Nolan exhaled heavily, rubbing his face. He still wasn't entirely sure how to feel about all of this. The idea of overthrowing Thrag had never even crossed his mind. He had been so focused on fulfilling his mission that he had never considered another way. Mark extended his hand toward his father, a soft golden glow emanating from his palm. Here. Let me fix you up. Nolan tensed at first but then allowed Mark's magic to flow over him, rapidly knitting his wounds back together. The pain faded, and he could breathe easily again. He looked at his son, now truly realizing just how different he was. They talked for over an hour after that, discussing how Mark would change the Empire. He spoke of diplomacy, of uniting worlds under a banner of cooperation rather than fear. Nolan listened, quietly impressed by his son's vision, though part of him still held doubts. After a while, Nolan frowned thoughtfully. You know, what you're proposing isn't really a coup. Mark blinked. What? Nolan smirked. It's more like a legitimate challenge for the throne. A real Viltrumite trial of leadership. Mark scratched the back of his head, a little embarrassed. Yeah, well. Coup d'état sounded cooler in the moment. Nolan burst out laughing, the tension between them finally easing. But then his laughter faded, and he looked down at his hands. A deep sadness settled over his features. I wish I knew this was an option before I did what I did, he muttered. Mark felt a pang in his chest. Dad. Nolan sighed and met Mark's gaze. I killed the Guardians of the Globe, Mark. I wanted to weaken Earth's defenses before the Empire came. And normally, I wouldn't regret it. I've had blood on my hands for thousands of years. But now, it feels wasteful. Mark clenched his fists. He had already known, deep down, but hearing his father confirm it still stung. The Guardians didn't have to die. You still have to answer for that, Mark said quietly. Nolan nodded. I know. And Mom, I'll tell her everything. Mark studied his father's face. For the first time, Nolan truly looked remorseful. Without another word, they both took off into the sky, heading home. When they walked through the front door, they found Debbie sitting at the dining table, clutching Omni-Man's bloodied suit in her hands. Her eyes were red, a mix of anger and heartbreak swirling in them. Nolan's stomach dropped. She had found the suit. Why? She whispered. Nolan swallowed hard. Debbie, she stood abruptly, slamming the suit onto the table. Why, Nolan? Mark stayed quiet, letting his father face this himself. Nolan took a deep breath. "I need to tell you the truth." And so he did. He told her everything, about the Viltrum Empire, about his mission, and about why he had killed the Guardians. Debbie trembled as she listened, looking between her husband and her son. Her gaze settled on Mark. "Did you know?" Mark's jaw tightened. "He told me the truth when we went out. And then I beat him down." She glanced at Nolan's torn uniform and dried blood. Her rage dimmed slightly, replaced by confusion. What happened? Mark and Nolan explained everything, the fight, their discussion, and their plan to challenge Thrag. Nolan met Debbie's gaze, his voice softer than before. "I'm going to atone for what I did to the Guardians." Before Debbie could respond, dozens of GDA agents suddenly uncloaked, weapons drawn. Cecil teleported in, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Debbie turned in remembrance. "I called them when I found the suit." Cecil stepped forward, eyes locked onto Nolan. "We knew it was you. We just didn't want to act unless you dropped your hero cover and went full-blown conqueror and whatnot." Nolan met Cecil's gaze. "I'm not resisting. Do what you have to." Cecil narrowed his eyes. "You're too strong to lock up. But if the Viltrumite Empire is coming, then your punishment is simple. You fight for us. You take orders. You protect Earth." Debbie flinched. "You're not arresting him?" "No," Cecil said. "But he'll be confined to his home when he's not on missions. And he'll be tracked at all times." A GDA agent approached, placing a diamond-shaped tracking device onto Nolan's shoulder that stuck to his skin. Nolan accepted the punishment without protest. Cecil turned to Mark. "Make sure your father behaves. We'll be watching the skies." Mark nodded. "Don't worry. This whole problem will be solved soon." Cecil smirked slightly before teleporting away with his men. As the awkward tension in the house settled, Mark took one look at his parents and muttered, "Welp. I'll let you guys talk amongst yourselves." And then he zipped up to his room at super speed. Debbie stared at Nolan, eyes still watery. Was our life together a lie? Nolan stepped forward, gently taking her hands. "No. When we first met, I was lying to myself, trying not to get attached. But you changed me, Debbie. You made me fall in love with you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." A fresh wave of tears spilled down Debbie's cheeks. Then, without hesitation, she pulled Nolan into a deep kiss. Upstairs, Mark turned off his super hearing and gagged. "Yuck. This is why super hearing sucks," he said with a green face. Mark walked out of Reginald Vell Johnson High, stretching slightly as he exhaled. His thoughts were still processing everything that had gone down with his dad, but at least things had settled for now. The GDA's constant surveillance was annoying, but at least they weren't actively interfering, yet. His company was growing steadily, he had plans in motion for the Viltrumite Empire, and his mother and father were finally talking things through. For once, things felt manageable. That was until he spotted Eve walking ahead, her shoulders tense, her footsteps hurried. Mark frowned, quickening his pace to catch up. "Eve," he called. She slowed slightly but didn't turn around immediately. When Mark finally reached her side, she sighed. "Oh, hey, Mark." Her voice lacked its usual energy, and her normally confident posture seemed off, like she was weighed down by something. "You okay?" Mark asked, genuinely concerned. Eve hesitated. "It's my parents." Mark already had an idea of what she meant. He remembered how her father had belittled her in the show, treating her like she was incapable of making her own choices. Still, Mark didn't push. Instead, he simply said, "Want to talk about it?" Eve glanced at him, a little surprised by how casual yet sincere he sounded. She hesitated for a moment but then sighed. "Yeah, but not here." Mark nodded. "Come on. Let's go to my place." Eve sat on Mark's bed, hugging a pillow to her chest as she vented. "My dad's being an ass. Again." She scoffed, shaking her head. "He keeps acting like I'm some helpless little girl. Like I can't take care of myself." Mark leaned against his desk, arms crossed as he listened. He told me I should get back together with Rex, just because he thinks I need protection. Her hands clenched the pillow. Can you believe that? He actually thinks I need Rex of all people to protect me. Mark raised a brow. Did you tell him that we're a team? Eve scoffed. Of course I did. Didn't change anything. If anything, he started on a rant about how I should be partners with an actual human, not an alien. Mark rolled his eyes. Wow. That's xenophobic. Right? It's like he refuses to accept that I broke up with Rex for a reason. He just wants me to have some macho guy to keep me in check. Mark exhaled through his nose. So, basically, he wants you to be some perfect little housewife. Exactly. Eve threw up her hands. It's infuriating. Mark's gaze softened. I'm sorry, Eve. That sounds like absolute bullshit. She sighed, hugging the pillow tighter. Yeah, but it's nothing new. They sat in silence for a moment before she continued. Honestly, I don't even know if I want to keep being a hero. Mark blinked in surprise. Wait, what? Eve hesitated, chewing her lip. I feel like I could be doing more. We save people, yeah, but we're always just putting out fires instead of stopping the problems at the root. She looked up at him, expression conflicted. What if I could actually fix things? The environment, poverty, food shortages, I could literally reshape the world if I put my mind to it. Mark nodded slowly. So why not do both? Eve raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mark smirked. You already have the power to change the world. You could help run my company with me. We've already been working together as a superhero duo. Why not do something just as important outside of fighting crime? Eve's eyes lit up a little. You're actually kinda smart sometimes, you know that? Mark stared at her and deadpanned. Don't sound so surprised. Eve chuckled, shaking her head. But then, her gaze lingered on him. She had spent so much time with Mark recently, fighting crime, talking about life, and supporting each other. He always made her feel heard. Before she even realized it, she leaned in. Mark's breath hitched slightly as Eve's lips met his. It was soft and hesitant at first. But then, he melted into it, responding just as eagerly. Her hands found their way to his shoulders, while Mark's rested gently on her waist. The kiss deepened, oh wow, they jerked apart like two guilty teenagers getting caught by their parents. Because, well, they were. Standing in the doorway was Debbie Grayson, arms crossed, an exasperated look on her face. I swear, I guess I can't keep you two lovebirds away from each other. Eve turned bright red, burying her face in her hands. Just kill me now. Mark groaned. Mom, Debbie shook her head, fighting a smirk. Dinner's almost ready. When you're done, whatever this is, come downstairs. She turned to leave, but Mark, never missing an opportunity, grinned. Hope you and Dad are done too, he teased. Debbie froze mid-step, remembering last night. Her face immediately turned beet red. Mark smirked. She turned back, grabbing a slipper from the hallway, and even though Mark could react, she chucked it at his head. It bounced off him harmlessly. Mark laughed. Eve, still covering her burning face, peeked between her fingers, then burst into giggles at the ridiculous sight. Debbie huffed. Brat. Then she stormed off. Eve tried to compose herself, but the mental image of a slipper bouncing off Mark's unfazed head was too much. She snorted. Then giggled. Then full-on laughed. Mark grinned at her. Glad I could entertain. Eve shook her head, still laughing as she stood up. Come on, dork. Let's eat before your mom kills you. Mark chuckled and followed after her. The table was set. Plates were filled. The three Graysons sat together, plus one extra. Eve had joined them before, but this time, it felt different. As they ate, Nolan casually glanced at Eve before looking at Mark. I guess we'll be seeing you at dinner more often. Eve choked on her drink. Mark sheepishly scratched his head. Debbie smirked, nudging Eve playfully. Hope you like home-cooked meals. Eve, still flustered, nodded quickly. Why yeah. I mean, I'd love to, If it's not too much trouble, Mark snickered. Breathe, Eve. She kicked him under the table, hurting her foot in the process. Debbie and Nolan shared a knowing look, both amused at the red-faced girl sitting across from them. Mark hummed a tune as he folded his clothes, tossing them into his duffel bag without much thought. Upstate University wasn't exactly the most exciting trip, but he had promised Amber, William, and Eve said that he'd check it out with them. A break from superheroing sounded nice. Even though he knew he'd be busy today. Canon-wise, this would be the time he would have to deal with Sinclair and fight his dad. But now he'll have to deal with the Immortal's body, the Mauler twins, and Sinclair. At least, he bought himself time to deal with the Rudy issue. That was just life now. Between running a company, fighting crime, developing new technology, planning for the future, and juggling his relationships, there was always something to do. Just as he reached for his phone, a sharp beeping noise filled the room. His coalition communicator, the one Alan the alien had given him before leaving, was going off. Mark's brows furrowed as he snatched it up. The holographic screen flickered, and Alan's wide, orange face appeared, but something was different. Mark's eyes widened. Dude, you're yoked. Alan smirked, flexing an arm that looked 3 times as thick as before. Yeah, that's what getting your ass handed to you by 3 Viltrumites and healing from near-death does to ya. Mark chuckled. Didn't think it worked like a gym membership. Alan laughed but quickly became serious. Listen, I called because you've got a problem. Mark sighed, already expecting this. The Viltrumites? Alan nodded grimly. Yeah. They're already near the edge of your solar system. They'll be on Earth soon. Mark exhaled through his nose. Figures it's today of all days. I and my dad will take care of it. Alan hesitated. Are you sure about Nolan? He's really on your side now. Mark rolled his eyes, leaning back against his desk. Yeah. I had to beat him down first, but he's with me now. Alan still looked skeptical. Well, if you say so. Mark leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Alan's through the screen. By the way, after we're done, we're gonna need a ride to the Coalition. Alan's brows raised. Why? Because, Mark said, his voice calm but firm, we're going to Viltrum next. Alan blinked in shock. What, are you serious? You actually think you can just fly right up to the entire Empire? Mark crossed his arms. That's the plan. Alan's expression twisted in disbelief. Mark, you do realize there's an entire planet of Viltrumites, right? Even if you're strong, that's suicide. Mark shook his head. That's what they want you to believe. But the truth is, there aren't that many left. Less than 50, actually. Alan froze. What? The Viltrum Empire was almost wiped out, Mark explained. A virus killed most of their population centuries ago. The only ones left are the strongest survivors. Alan was still processing this when another figure stepped into the frame behind him. He's telling the truth. Mark immediately recognized Thetis, the leader of the Coalition of Planets. Alan turned toward him. Wait, you knew about this? Thetis sighed, reaching up to his face. Then, in a single motion, he ripped away his long white beard, revealing a familiar Viltrumite mustache underneath. Alan jumped back, eyes wide. You're a Viltrumite, Thetis confirmed. The very same one who killed his leader, Argol, and helped develop the Scourge virus. Mark remained silent, already knowing this from the comics. Thetis stepped forward, addressing him directly. You're proposing a duel of leadership against Thrag, the strongest Viltrumite in history? Mark nodded. That's right. Thetis studied him for a long moment, noticing Mark's absolute confidence before nodding slowly. Then the fate of countless planets is on your shoulders. Thaddeus nodded, then turned to Alan. Prepare a ship. If Mark succeeds against the Viltrumites on Earth, we'll bring him here to plan the next step. Alan sighed, shaking his head. All right, men. Guess I'll be seeing you soon. The transmission cut off, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Busy day. All right. Another thing on today's to-do list. Beat the hell out of some Viltrumites. Mark descended the stairs as his clothes morphed into his suit, his mind already shifting gears. He had a few stops to make before heading off to space. As he entered the living room, he spotted Nolan suiting up, fastening his red cape around his shoulders. His expression was set, eyes sharp. He was ready for battle. Before Mark could speak, Nolan spoke up first. Cecil stopped by saying there was an alien ship at the edge of the solar system approaching Earth, probably the Viltrumites we were expecting. Mark smirked. Coalition just called about that. Then, there was a knock at the front door. Mark sighed, already knowing who it was. When he opened the door, William, Amber, and Eve stood there, all looking confused. "Dude, what the hell?" William asked, eyebrows raised. "Why are you wearing your invincible suit? We're supposed to be driving to upstate you." Mark rubbed the back of his neck, offering them an apologetic smile. "Yeah, about that. Change of plans." Amber frowned. "Don't tell me, aliens," Mark confirmed. "The kind that wants to kill me. Gotta take care of it." Amber sighed, clearly annoyed but not surprised. "Great." Eve, however, looked concerned. "You're going alone?" "No," Mark said. "My dad's coming too. We'll take them off planet to make sure no one here gets hurt." Amber crossed her arms. "And when were you planning to tell us?" "Right now." Mark smirked, pulling 3 small wristwatches from his pocket. "Which brings me to this." He handed one to each of them. William raised a brow. "What, did you finally figure out that punctuality is a thing?" Mark rolled his eyes. "No. Emergency watches. Press the button on the side, and it'll emit a frequency only I can hear while on Earth and alert my suit while in space. If you're ever in trouble, I'll know and be there immediately." Amber's irritation faded slightly as she examined the watch. "That's actually kind of sweet." Mark shrugged. "Just making sure you guys stay safe while I'm gone." Eve studied the watch on her wrist before looking up at him. "How long do you think this fight will take?" "Hopefully not long." Amber sighed, stepping forward and giving him a tight hug. "Just come back, okay?" "I always do," Mark murmured. When Eve pulled him into a hug too, she held on a little longer than expected before pulling back. "We'll be waiting." Mark nodded, stepping back as William smirked. "Damn. I feel left out. Where's my kiss?" Mark laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe next time." With that, William, Amber, and Eve climbed into William's car, driving off toward upstate Nolan, who had been silently watching from the doorway, finally spoke in a teasing tone. "You've got 2 girls fighting over you." Mark groaned. "Dad. Seriously?" Nolan smirked. "It's a valid observation." Mark ignored him. "I've got one more thing to do. Be right back." Before Nolan could respond, Mark vanished in a burst of speed, heading toward the Mauler twins' hideout. As Mark approached the warehouse, he activated his X-ray vision, scanning the interior. He spotted them, the Mauler twins, standing over the immortal's body. His severed head lay on a metal table, wires connected to his temples. They were talking, discussing how they would reanimate the immortal and use him as a weapon. Mark didn't give them a chance. He opened a portal beneath the immortal's body and head, sending them directly to his private lab in the Flaxen dimension. As the body parts vanished, one of the twins turned. "Wait. Where the hell did he go?" His clone looked around frantically. "You don't think? Did he just revive himself?" Mark smirked from above, then blasted off back toward his father, leaving the twins panicking below. Mark flew beside Nolan, who was already hovering above the house, arms crossed. "Handled your business?" Nolan asked. Mark smirked. "Yep." Nolan nodded. "Good. Now let's go make sure Earth stays ours." With that, father and son shot into space, heading for Neptune's orbit, where the Viltrumites awaited. At Guardians HQ, Rex and Black Samson were sparring, surrounded by the rest of the Guardians, who were supposed to be watching. Monster Girl sat on the bench, stretching her arms with a sigh as she listened to Duplicate and Shrinking Ray talks about mundane things. She had been content to just listen until Ray, ever the curious one, turned the conversation in her direction. "So, Amanda," Ray said, shifting on the bench to face her. "You've been sighing a lot. That's a new thing, or is there a certain someone on your mind?" Amanda scoffed, crossing her arms. "It's not like that. Just, schedules not lining up, I guess." Kate raised a brow, leaning in with a smirk. "So there is someone. That's new. You've never really mentioned dating since you turned back." Amanda hesitated for a moment before sighing again. "It's not dating, really. We just don't get a lot of time together. He's busy, and I'm busy. It's complicated." Ray nudged her playfully. "You should just tell him you want to hang out more. If you're into him, make it happen." Kate grinned. "Yeah, I mean, it's Invincible, right?" Amanda's eyes widened slightly before she quickly masked her expression. "What? Where'd you get that idea?" Kate rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You're not exactly subtle. You've been spending a lot of time with him since, you know." Amanda blushed but didn't deny it. "Since he cured her." Robot stood across the room, his mechanical body perfectly still, yet his mind was anything but. He had been monitoring their conversation, analyzing every detail, every tone shift, every glance. And now, hearing Amanda talk about Mark this way, it took everything in him not to crush the tablet in his hands. Something had changed. Amanda had always been someone he could relate to. They were both trapped in bodies that didn't reflect their true selves. She was cursed with an affliction that reversed her age every time she transformed. He was a man whose real body was too weak, too fragile to ever truly live in the world the way he wanted. When he designed his plans to create a new body, he had imagined a future where he and Amanda understood each other, where she could see his struggles, and they could bond over their mutual afflictions. But Invincible had ruined that. Invincible had done what he couldn't. He had cured Amanda's affliction, reversing her to her true age, and even if it wasn't permanent, it was only a matter of time. Robot had spent months researching a solution, testing theories, searching for a way to help her, and yet Invincible had solved it before him. And now? Now Amanda laughed when she spoke about Invincible. Now she blushed when he was mentioned. Now her thoughts lingered on him, not on the person who had spent so much time ensuring her safety, watching out for her. That should have been me. Robot's fingers twitched as he processed the bitter realization. He had planned to get another sample of Rex's DNA. But now he realized he needs the blood of something better. Something invincible.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.